Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 8 true Walmart horror stories, what happens after midnight in the aisles. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Now, let's begin. I've never figured out why so many clocks in that building loved 11:58. The time clock by the door would hang there like it was waiting for permission to become tomorrow, and my phone would already be nudging past midnight. Maybe that's how big buildings measure time, by weather and air and shifts, not by minutes. All I know is the first night, the time card printer spit out a little slip with 2358 stamped in blocky numbers, and I felt something catch in my chest, like I'd stepped into a frame that was already hung. We were still a 24-hour store then. People drifted out in ones and twos, clutching last-minute milk and cat litter, and the sliding doors sighed and closed like it was a relief. The greeter, a woman with dove-gray hair and the posture of someone who knew how to handle trouble without raising her voice, hooked a heavy ring of keys through a carabiner on her vest and gave me an encouraging smile. "Overnights?" she asked. When I nodded, her smile thinned like a secret, but stayed kind. Alicia was my overnight coach. Thin, always moving, no wasted words. She cracked open a box of energy drinks with her keys while she walked me through the basics. Channel 1 unless you're grocery, then 3. Don't block the fire doors. Don't ride the Zamboni. Vendors don't work past midnight. Anybody says they're a vendor after that and doesn't have a badge, send them to me. She slid me a radio and a dull box cutter and took me on a slow loop tour that somehow felt fast. The building at that hour has a sound that isn't quite sound. The hum of the lights is a high mosquito whine. The HVAC exhales in long, patient breaths. The fans over frozen blow at a pitch that sits just behind your eyes. Every first step into Action Alley reverbs off the tiles, the squeak of shoe rubber traveling farther than it should. I remember cleaner, lemon, sharply sweet, and the warmer smells you don't notice during the day. Plastic off-gassing from new totes, the papery dust of corrugate, dairy carrying a sour edge under the cold. We walked past lawn and garden, tarped and chained, where the air felt somehow older. Electronics was dark like a stage waiting for a cue, cabinets locked, wires braided neat. Housewares was my bay, or part of it. "You'll start in 17 through 19, Alicia said, tapping a laminated map where 100 aisles were shaved down into neat rectangles. "Face, fill, bin, repeat. If you hear Code Adam on the PA, everything stops. You'll learn the rest." I could feel the nerves under my skin trying to pretend they weren't nerves. Every new job does that. Repackages your fear as focus. I nodded at everything. I pretended the break room didn't make my stomach flip with its burnt coffee and a fridge that smelled like a sweet, rotten fruit someone forgot in August. The TV in there had a looping training video and a soft corporate voice about safety first, eye protection, bending at the knees. Posters curled on a corkboard. Our beliefs in bold spark blue, a list of numbers for maintenance, floor scrubber, baler, compactor, the AP extension with a handwritten 0 added after the printed number. Someone had taped a piece of old vest fabric, navy, not the newer, brighter blue, over a tear in the couch arm. The texture caught my eye because it didn't match. Older weave, more denim than polyester. When I brushed it with my thumb, a string stuck to my palm, clingy with static like it had been waiting for a hand. We rounded back through receiving, where the galvanized steel rose like a nervous system toward the ceiling, and the yellow lines told you where you were allowed to put your feet and your weight. "You'll get lost back here if you let it," Alicia said. "Don't let it." She didn't smile when she said it, and I think that's when I started paying attention to things I might have dismissed before, little misalignments. The same pen stuck in the same seam of the same clipboard in 3 different places, the walk-in door frosting a little on the wrong side, a ladder under the top stock in 17 when we hadn't reached 17 yet. "Questions?" she asked. I had 100. I said, "No," and felt the building breathe. Alicia parked me in the break room with one of those binders that look thicker than a weekend and said she'd be back after the huddle. The training video's voice was so calm, I started resenting it. "Always ring the bell at the baler," it said. "Always assume a customer is listening." The TV was an old flat screen with a slimline DVD player hanging under it like a chin. Across from me, a microwave blinked 12 Hunkwick with stubborn optimism, and the vending machine lit the potato chips like stained glass. I skimmed, tried to learn which codes meant spills, and which meant theft, and which meant don't panic, just breathe. The more I read, the more I felt like I'd been awake for days, even though my shift had barely started. I don't know what made me look up. There's always a little click before a page on the PA, the sound the line makes when it's claimed. I heard it from the ceiling speaker, a faint tick like fingernail on glass, and then nothing. Not even static, just the feeling of room noise leaning in. I waited for the announcement, the customer service 2, the manager on duty 2, the corporate warmth, but it was only the nothing, padded and soft. The TV's voice recited, "Hold on about slicing tape away from your body." I told myself it was the system checking itself, some kind of test. You can make yourself accept almost anything if you give it a name. System test, I thought. Routine. Then it clicked again, fast, like whoever was on the other end realized they'd hit the button wrong. The speaker breathed. Not air exactly, but that sense of pressure changing when somebody opens a door. A hiss the length of 1 second. I waited for the voice. The microwave blinked at me. Somewhere out on the floor scrubber started its low whale song, and far away beep beep beep, the sound the operator makes backing it up. When the third click didn't bring anything either, I got up like I'd been told to. No one had told me anything really. The hallway always smelled different from the break room. Cooler, metal, not better or worse, just like you'd moved into a different country without crossing a border. I stepped past the little office with the cameras flickering black and white, past the bulletin board with birthdays pinned up crooked, and out into Action Alley. There's a feeling when the store finally empties that I still can't describe without getting it wrong. It's not isolation. It's not peace. It's like the building remembers how much space it has. My shoes made that long squeak as I moved toward 17, like I'd known all along I'd be going there. On a sensible level, it was my bay, the only place I really belonged yet. On a less sensible level, I could feel the hum of the lights press a fraction tighter over housewares, like fabric stretched one notch more. The ladder I'd noticed earlier was still tucked under the shelf, and that calmed me. You can't be in an empty store if there's a ladder set up, right? A person had to have touched that. My handheld wasn't issued yet, so all I had was the binder and the box cutter. I slid my fingers under the top shelf to check for rough edges like the training said, and my nails scraped something smooth. Plastic. I leaned and saw, half in shadow at the back of the shelf, a tape measure extended and caught. The yellow ribbon bent in a shallow V like it had been let go and snagged, numbers showing in reverse through the plastic. I waited without knowing why, and the tape gave a shy little knock against the underside of the shelf. Tack. Waited. Tack. I straightened, ridiculous heat climbing my neck because I could picture too clearly the scene of me getting spooked by a tape measure. "Hey, you lose something?" I called into the next aisle, my voice soaked up by shelves and merchandise into something smaller. There's a particular silence that comes off boxed things, plastic bowls, picture frames, the weight of them eating the echo. Alicia had been right. You can get lost in there even when you're standing still. Something rolled just beyond the end cap, soft, like a metal wheel that needed oil. The floor scrubber's beep, beep, beep drifted near, and I stepped back instinctively, pushing the ladder in with a knee so it wouldn't clip. The machine glided past me in the main aisle, slow and obedient, its amber light winking a steady rhythm. There wasn't anyone in the driver's seat. It's not impossible. Some of the newer ones can run a route, but ours wasn't new, and I had a petty inventory of what in the building was new and wasn't because I mopped up after both. I watched it go anyway, certain that when it cleared the end cap I'd see a hand on the wheel, a bent head, a bored face. Nothing. Just the machine and its little lamp reflecting off the polished tile, throwing a jelly bean of yellow light onto the ace of a fire extinguisher sign. For a second, not longer, not even a breath, I saw, in the curved reflection on a bottom pan, somebody cross Action Alley from left to right, a blue flash and the motion of a person late for something. I turned with my mouth already opening for hey. He shouted, but my turn was too slow for what I'd thought I saw, and the aisle was empty. A plastic bowl teetered and settled, no more dramatic than that. Beyond the registers, the automatic doors sighed again as the night coughed up one last customer. "Where'd you go?" Alicia's voice fizzed on the radio I'd clipped to my belt like it had always been there. "You're missing the huddle." "Housewares," I said, and even to me it sounded like an excuse. I pushed the ladder back where it had been and took a stupid step to straighten a front-facing set of canisters that were already lined up like soldiers. The 50-cent tags had a little white dust on them that wasn't dust, just the powder small labels give off when you tear them. They looked like they'd been printed a long time and just cut from the strip. "On my way," I said, and left the tape measure under the shelf because touching it felt too much like making a decision. I think about that tape measure more often than I should. Not because a bent piece of metal can mean anything on its own, but because of the feeling I had standing there, that pressing certainty that if I pulled the ribbon free, something would either snap back into place or slip just a little further out of it. Neither outcome was what I wanted on my first night, so I went to the huddle. Alicia stood on the base of a pallet jack, her radio clipped high, reading off task lists while people circled in, zipping vests, rolling their shoulders as if readying their bodies to carry weight that wasn't just cases. She didn't ask why I was late. She didn't look like someone who believed in late. She assigned me end caps and zoning and a couple of bins that didn't exist in the computer even though you could touch them. Everyone there knew it without saying it. The paper in the building didn't always match. If I'd said something about the PA clicks, she might have told me. About the system glitching, how sometimes the switchboard did a thing, people had to come reset. If I'd mentioned the scrubber, someone would have explained that Manny prided himself on nursing old machines into doing new tricks, that he'd hacked together a route using weight on the seat and zip ties. If I'd said I thought I saw a person in a reflection but not in a real space, they would have shrugged. It's mirrors and lights, it's tired eyes. I didn't say any of it. New people don't lead with feelings, not in a place that measures time in case packs and pallets moved. Around 3, my stomach went hollow enough to listen, and I heated a burrito in the microwave that always protested with a few sticky door beeps. In the break room again, the training video had hiccuped into a blue screen with a menu I couldn't control, static around the edges like cold. Someone had left their vest over the back of a chair, navy blue old style with the old sparkle star patch, not the happier font we wore now. I brushed a crumb off the patch and paused because my name is short but it's not common, and it was stitched right there. 4 letters, perhaps 2 names, perhaps a coincidence. The last letter had a tail like it had been restitched. I thumbed the embroidery without meaning to, and it was cooler than the room. By 5, I wasn't exactly tired, just thin. That's what lack of sleep did to me at that age. It didn't shut me down. It let too much in. The store got louder the closer you got to dawn. The receiving door barked open and shut. Somebody laughed with too much relief. The bakery ovens thunked off and breathed warmth into an aisle that hadn't asked for it. The clock near the break room read 11:58 when I clocked out at 7:03 a.m. I pressed the side of the plastic with a fingertip until it flexed and snapped back, as if that would nudge time into telling the truth. It didn't. There's a specific ugliness to the parking lot at that hour that I grew to love. The sky is exactly the wrong color, neither night nor day. The lights buzz like a headache you've learned to ignore. The blackbirds patrol with militant purpose. The pockets of the wind carry other people's lives in them. Laundry, fast food, a hit of cologne, and the cabs of the code-compliant puddle under the roof just beyond the vestibule smell like stale heat. I sat in my car with the door open and let the morning reach me. The little slip of 2358 sat in my pocket like a joke I didn't get. Back in my apartment, the quiet felt wrong because it wasn't a building's quiet. No hum, no hiss, no air cycling under netted lights. I kept hearing that faint PA click in the wrong places. The fridge, the bathroom fan, the moment between laying the key down and letting it go. When I finally slept, I woke too soon and sure I'd been paged. Over the next few nights, I made agreements with myself. Don't get weird about numbers on clocks. Assume there's a reason if something seems off. There usually is. If the PA breathes, it's just old wiring or someone leaning on a button. If something moves, it's Manny's machine or air currents or me misremembering where I set things. Say hi to everyone. Learn names fast. Keep your head down and your hands busy and your radio on channel 1. I carried the box cutter like a talisman and the binder like a shield and pretended both made me part of the store. Manny caught me in receiving on night 3 and tapped the steel above me with a knuckle. The building lungs, he said, as if continuing a conversation I hadn't joined. They'll mess with you when you're new. You'll sync up. He had the gentle voice of someone who liked machines better than people, but didn't mind people too much either. He told me if a ladder appears where you didn't leave it, it means someone's doing you a favor or someone's lazy. No third option. If the freezer knocks, it's expansion and contraction. If the cameras fuzz, it's just dust. You get used to it, he said. You have to, or you jump at every nothing. I liked the certainty with which he named things. It let me put a shape around what I felt, even if the shape didn't fit perfectly. Still, I started walking the long way around 17, not because I was afraid of a shelf, but because I didn't want to know whether the tape was still caught. When I did go back, the ladder was gone. The shelf was perfectly faced, the tape in the pack, flush. I chose a story. Someone had finished what I was supposed to do. No harm, no mystery. And yet I kept the 2358 slip in my glove compartment until it stuck to something and tore. I didn't tell anyone about the reflection because I didn't know how to say what I'd really seen. Not a person, not exactly, just the knowledge of one. I didn't tell anyone about the 3 clicks because I wasn't sure they made me sound the way I felt. When I think of that first night now, the details have settled like silt. The lemon cleaner, the old vest patch, the stubborn clocks, until all I'm left with is a feeling so simple, I don't know why it took me so long to admit it. The building knew I was there, and I knew the building knew. Whether that matters, I still can't say, but the next time the PA clicked open and held its breath, I was already looking up. I'd been there long enough to stop double-checking which side of my vest the name sat on, not long enough to be anything other than housewares to most of the crew. On the radio, I was 17, which I pretended not to like and secretly did because it felt like being a coordinate on a map that made sense. On that shift, Alicia had put me on bay work but also told me, "Service desk's light tonight. If the bell rings and no one's up there, answer the phones and page." You know the wording. I'd learned the wording like a prayer. Polite, compa, act, as if the store were a place where clarity fixed everything. The in-store phones were all alike, beige, wall-mounted, a tight spring of coiled cord that always remembered the last hand that twisted it. Each had a single green button that sent your voice floating out across the ceiling, and I'd used it 3 times by then, each time tentative, like approaching a lake I wasn't sure was frozen enough to hold me. There's a tiny click before you own the air. Subtle, but you feel it through your wrist into your throat. The first night, I'd heard those clicks without words and chalked it up to a system test. By the week after, I'd stopped looking up every time the ceiling cleared its throat. I wanted to be easy inside it, like everyone else was. The store had settled into its late-night persona, the air colder in electronics, warmer near bakery where tomorrow's bread was halfway itself in the ovens, a sweetness that made me thirsty. Out in lawn garden, the tarps whispered when the HVAC pushed, a sound like a giant body turning over in sleep. The security domes stared down with their black-eyed shine, always suggesting cameras even in the corners that had never had them. My hands had learned where the box cutter lived in my back pocket, learned the wrist flick that opened it without looking. I'd learned, too, that if I stopped moving, my heart found the building's rhythm and matched it. Hiss, a high fan note under my eyes, until it felt normal. The paging etiquette was simple. We were told not to use it for nothing, not to clog the air with chatter. You paged when something needed a body, assistance to a lockup case, a manager to speak to someone impatient about a return, a code atom that tightened the world into a point. The voice you use is not quite your voice. The building rounds you off at the edges, smooths your consonants, gives you a retail warmth that feel. It's like a borrowed shirt. I guess that's why I noticed the difference before I could name it. When the building page voice doesn't belong to a person, there's no warmth for it to borrow. It arrives too even, as if it had been sanded. The S sounds thin, the breath doesn't scatter. Alicia passed me going the other way, her arms full of reshops that couldn't possibly all belong to one person's night. Channel 1, she reminded me, for no reason except that it made you feel like there were rules, like the rules were enough. Manny drove the floor scrubber into the shadowed back of GM and left it idling while he dug in a toolkit, the amber light ticking on and off like a patient heartbeat. The intercom clicked twice above me. Just that. And I made myself finish slicing the straps on a case of bowls before I looked up. Night does that to you. Teaches you how to ignore something until you decide to admit it. When the service desk bell rang, a hollow, apologetic ding, I found the desk dark but warm with the kind of touchedness that lingers. A pen still uncapped, a receipt printer's last curl of paper untorn. "Service desk to the front," I said into the beige phone because the script felt safer than improvisation, and set the handset down gently like it could bruise. The air felt ordinary. The store was full of ordinary enough moments that you could tuck your worries into them and no one would know. The first time I heard my name come out of the ceiling, I thought I'd misheard. There's a joke about retail that you'll answer to anything shouted in the right tone, and I'd assumed some other poor new hire had been indoctrinated as, "Hey you," or "Excuse me," and I was only feeling implicated. But it said my name the way a nurse once said it to me when I was a kid being fitted for a nebulizer mask, with a gentleness that came from the flattening of breath by plastic. It stretched the vowels a hair too long, kept the consonants clean. "Manager on duty to housewares, Saus, name to ho. You swear 17, please." The PA always clicks first. This time the click scraped a fraction more than usual, like a nail sliding across a dry line. I stood a second too still with a tower of ceramic bowls poised like a precarious city in my arms. The radio at my hip was quiet, and then crackled with someone's laughter from receiving, no urgency in it. I waited for Alicia to answer back, or for the familiar page footer. "Thank you," but the system breathed instead, a pulled-in hush that lasted exactly 1 second, like the end of a long inhale against rubber. "I'm in 17, I said into my radio, before I thought to be embarrassed by how literal that sounded. "Who paged?" Silence. Then Manny, too close to his mic. Not me. I'm in the back. Swear to God. Wasn't me, Alicia said, all business. Keep working. Something in the assurance of that keep working made my fingers clumsier. I set the bowls down and went to the end cap. The intercom clicked again. Customer assistance to electronics locked case, it said. Only it said electronics the old way, like a brochure. Electronics. Polite, precise. Not the bored shorthand we used on radios. I could see electronics from my aisle. The steel grates rolled down like eyelids. We don't post anyone there overnight. The phone mounted just outside the counter blinked a lazy red. Line 3 holding. I crossed over because doing something beats standing still, because maybe someone had crept under the grate and needed batteries or a birthday present at 2:19 a.m., and I could turn it into a story about the oddness of people. The handset was cool, even though the store was never cold in that part of the floor. I pressed it to my ear and got that thin, breathy room tone you get when you're near something running. Electronics, I said, because the word felt like a charm. The breath was there, not human breathing, but a pressure wave. In and hold, out and hold, quick enough to live but too regular for a body. Hello? I added and felt foolish immediately because the dead air didn't owe me conversation. In the distance, the floor scrubber's alarm chirped as it reversed and then stilled, the amber pulse lighting the bottoms of the grates like stage lights. The display on the phone said the call had originated from Garden Center. That would have been funny if the gate out there weren't chained so tight it left a bruise on your hand when you tugged it. The garden phone is mounted inside the cage, behind a metal grid meant to deter easy decisions. Hearing a call from there at this hour is like watching a locked car's dome light turn on and off with no shadows moving inside it. I tried to catch sight of anyone I could send as witness. The store had that last hour thinness, where the few of us on shift stretched long and quiet between bays. Manny? I asked, not on the radio this time, but into the PA, as if whatever was behind the air would answer. The breath went a second longer than a person would choose. Then the line clicked and dropped, and the steady fluorescent hum flowed back into my ear like I'd had it dammed and only then released it. Back at Housewares, the overhead speaker nestled in the acoustic tile clicked open and exhaled. Associate to automotive, it said, and the word associate made my skin go prickly because it sounded like old training videos, and automotive was locked and dark. Manager to Housewares 17. The second time it said manager, the word glitched across itself, a soft stutter, like a CD catching on a scratch, and then I heard the same breath flatten under it, disciplined and wrong. I went to the AP office because if I didn't put my feet in a different hallway, I'd stand in the rind of the sound until I convinced myself it was in my head. The little room smelled like stale coffee and the warm dust of electronics. Screens showed 8 angles of the store, all grayscale and the kind of sharp that makes edges look mean. I wasn't trying to be brave, I was trying to be practical. Did you hear that? I asked the empty chair, and hated the superstition that made me think if I asked a question in that room, someone would materialize. Manny sidled in anyway, not because I'd conjured him, but because wires do not stay attached to old machines without men like Manny. Hear what? He asked, hiding a smile for what he thought was me getting jumpy. I told him. He hit a key, dragged back the timeline, found the minute where the ceiling breathed my name. On the playback, the moment the intercom clicked, the video smudged. Not a full drop, just a smear, like a thumb across a phone camera. The timecode held steady until the word manager loaded in, man, and then the frame skipped. 02-17-14, 02-17-14, 02-17-15. The sound on the recording was a wash, like wind rushing past a closed mouth. Cheap DVR, Manny said, which was both true and not an answer. Old cable runs. Moisture. You okay? Yeah, I lied. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to get yelled at for not answering a page. You did, he said, not unkind. Somebody paged you. Doesn't mean somebody called you. He thumped the rack like it was a reluctant old dog and went back to the scrubber he could fix. I tried to make it rational by stacking facts like cases on a pallet. Phones cross-talk. Lines get moisture in them. Old systems loop, that's what everyone said. There had been another associate once who swore the paging trunk would seize randomly and then spew bits of previous announcements like a parrot that learned phrases from a house that had moved on. I'd heard phantom elevator dings in office buildings before. The way mechanical things carry their own ghosts forward. Every explanation worked until I was alone under a speaker and heard the drag of plastic breath. The thing that clung wasn't the words. It was the way the system seemed to know which ones mattered. Anyone can call for a manager. Anyone can say associate to electronics. Even a tape loop can do that if it's dumb enough. But Housewares 17, and then my name, a name still not yet natural on the tongues of the people I worked with, that stuck. I told myself my name had been on the nightly list, the task sheet Alicia wrote out in thick marker on a clipboard with everyone's assignments. Maybe someone had glanced at it, someone bored, someone with a sense of humor as dry as dish powder, and boring is just the word we use when possibilities get tight. Or maybe the building kept our names in the way it keeps heat. Alicia made notes while I talked, not because she thought anything supernatural was happening, but because she filed maintenance tickets like other people smoked cigarettes. Steady, necessary, a way to show your body and mind you had it under control. Write down the times, she said. We'll send to a T. They'll say it's the switch again. She did not say I was being dramatic. She did not accuse me of hearing things. Her courtesy kept me from saying the thing that wanted out. It isn't words I'm afraid of, it's breath. Manny, listening while pretending not to, said, "You know the garden line is cut. It's not even terminated. I mean, it's there, but it isn't." He said it like that, like a joke, and maybe I laughed too, to show good faith that I'd stick with the explanations. He told me a story about an old switchboard at another store that would light up lines from phones that had been removed years before, pulling power from nowhere, reporting calls that never completed. Electricity is lazy, he said. It takes whatever path is easiest. Sometimes that path looks like weird. So I made my own lists. Times, locations, words. The pattern that emerged was a loss. USE nothing, which made it worse. 1:42 a.m., a click in frozen, no speech. 2:17 a.m., the name and housewares. 3:03 a.m., assistance to electronics. 3:47 a.m., manager to housewares, the man glitch again. Days with nothing at all piled up right next to nights with 3 pages in a row. But the 17s bothered me because I wanted the store to be random in normal ways and intentional only when a person made it so. The 17s felt like the middle of a math problem I didn't know how to solve. Later, they would mean more. That night, they just stuck like burrs. I tried to record it. The second I started a recording on my phone and held it up toward the acoustic tile like a supplicant, the microphone filled with white hiss, and the world forgot how to breathe weirdly. The page that came next was as normal as a training video, associate to sporting goods. The air sat without contour. Later, when I checked the video Manny had replayed, the bit with the skip at Euro 2:17:14, the copy he exported for me was clean. No smear, no double-stamp time. I had to learn to sit with 2 truths. It happened, and there was nothing to show. I told no one about the morning in my apartment where I set coffee to brew and the machine made a noise exactly like the PA click. My heart went off like a bad-placed alarm. When the drip started, I put both hands on the counter like I could hold my body down. It wasn't the coffee. It was what my nerves had learned to listen for, how they reset around the store's rhythm so quickly. Later, I didn't like that about myself, that I could sink to a place so fast that I brought its false dawns home with me. But that's what overnights do. Your boundaries thin out. I started standing under speakers on purpose. The way you look at a dog you're afraid of, so it can't surprise you. I wanted it to do it again so I could decide how to be about it. It did. Not every night. Not predictably. Enough that the click and the breath in my name stopped being separate incidents and started being a category of event the store could produce. Spills, reshop, pages that breathed. I stopped asking at the huddles if anyone else heard it. It split us into camps I didn't want to name. Those who had a place for it inside their sense of the world and those who didn't. I kept my lists anyway. People will tell you the store is just fluorescent lights and shrink-wrapped goods and a paycheck on a Friday. And that's true. But we all carry the shape of the buildings we move through. By the time the intercom knew my name, the building had already memorized my footsteps, the pace of my stalking, the way I breathed when I didn't think about breathing. Maybe that's all it was. A closed loop, the kind you can explain with electricity and delayed audio and a tired brain. Or maybe it was a mouth pressed close to the building's lung, practicing the names of the people inside it like it was trying to speak right. Either way, when the click came again, I looked up and I said, "I hear you," even though my radio stayed quiet and the air did what air does and moved through me like I was only another aisle. By the time the blue smock started appearing, I'd learned 17 by touch. If you blindfolded me, I could have told you where the pegboard bowed a 1/4 inch from the steel and which bottom shelf always tried to pinch your fingers when you set it back on its clips. People think housewares is just bowls and spatulas, but the bay is a kind of muscle you build. What belongs where, what looks right at a glance. We'd converted to a new mod not long before, a different brand on the left-facing wall, nestables turned sideways to pop color, a stack of acrylic canisters replacing the glass that used to be there. I had the paper proof in my pocket, planogram number, last update date, a tidy diagram that made the world feel like it could be neatly condensed and obeyed. One Monday I came back from throwing cardboard in the baler and found 17 looking better than I could make I. But look, not in a showy way, no Pinterest zeal, just the rightness of someone who understood the feel of a shelf. The peg hooks were all at true 90 degrees, the price strip slid so the little perforation dots lined up, the canisters nested in a way that used 2 extra units I hadn't yet pulled. And the peg locks, they were all turned to 4 o'clock, the way a lot of the older associates do it, not straight down. Habit leaves fingerprints like that. I stood there with my box cutter halfway out and felt that small, complicated gratitude of being helped without having asked. "Thanks," I said automatically. It echoed dully into the product. No one answered. I stepped around the end cap like I'd catch the person, but the aisle was oral history. Noise without speaker. The floor scrubber's amber flash stitched light along the top of the grates in electronics, and from garden center came a wind that wasn't wind, just HVAC turning through tarps. I went back to 17 and noticed something else. The price labels. Our labels had switched to a new font a few months ago, rounder with a thicker 5. These looked a hair thinner, the black just a tiny shade lighter, the perforations like older paper. They weren't wrong, numbers and barcodes checked, but they were like finding an old yearbook photo slid into a current frame. Eileen from Days works that side sometimes, so I asked her when she came in early, cradling a coffee and a look that said the morning wasn't quite in her bones yet. "You fix my bay?" I asked, keeping my voice casual, non-accusation, a little hopeful even. She frowned the way people do when you hand them a story they weren't present for. "Nope," she said. "I don't touch other people's mods. Ask Alicia if she moved anyone over to help you." Alicia shook her head later, not because she couldn't have assigned someone, but because she wouldn't. It messes with accountability. "If I give you 17, it's yours," she said. "Ask for help if you need it. Don't credit ghosts for other people's labor." I wasn't trying to. It's just that once you start seeing a signature, you see it everywhere. The following night, the ladder I used, the lightweight one with the wobble and the second step, was gone, and in its place sat the heavy old rolling ladder with the sandpaper treads. It had a maintenance sticker on the side curled back like a dead leaf. The date half rubbed. 2013. The rails were cold in a way that felt outside of the store temperature, the kind of cold you only get off something that's been sleeping. I pushed it to the bay because that's what you do when a tool appears where you need a tool. The wheels protested with a sound like a throat clearing. There was a bit of thread caught in one of the rail bolts, navy. I'd noticed navy threads before in the break room, stuck to a patched bit of couch arm. I'd seen the older vests in photos taped to lockers. Navy, heavier weave. The Spark Star patch sewn on with a hand that didn't care if the corners sat perfectly. Our current vest had a lighter, almost cheerful blue, a font built to be friendly. If you've never worked in a place through a uniform change, it's hard to explain how much people hitch their sense of self to fabric. The first time I saw the navy slide past the mouth of 17, I thought my brain had reached back into those photos and pulled something forward. There was the hem, a little longer, a little narrower, and the square of a name patch whose letters I couldn't read at the angle, just the busy shine of stitching catching light. I rounded into seasonal and found nothing but a promo stack of cinnamon brooms, making the air smell like October when it was not October. I went back to 17 muttering that somebody was messing with me, and maybe they were. Maybe a day associate had dropped a vest in their car and put on an old spare without thinking, or maybe my eyes were tired and wanted familiarity more than certain. Tainty. Still, when I climbed the heavy ladder to straighten topstock, I found grease pencil tally marks under the lip of the steel where you wouldn't ever look unless your hands got bored of the work. 5 slashes crossed and beneath, 17. The 7 had a bar through it like the older associates write. European style. I told myself some vendor must have done it years ago. I told myself that because I didn't want to pull at a thread, I couldn't retie. Ruth, who had the kind of practical kindness that makes you feel held without being held, rolled her cart past and paused at my bay. "Looks good," she said, and then flitting, quick, "Don't say her name. Some folks get superstitious over little things. Anyway, leave the 4 o'clock locks. I like how they sit." She moved on before I could ask who, which is sometimes how answers come, on their own terms, only halfway. The mod change for 17 came down in a thick stack of printouts that smelled faintly of toner and heat. Alicia handed them to me like coursework. "Tonight," she said, "break it and build it." Breaking a bay is a kind of violence you learn to do gently. Pull every unit, strip the labels, roll the hooks into empty gray, set your world in bins labeled A through E so you can put it all back like a puzzle. I had the radio at my hip, a Sharpie behind my ear, the box cutter warming my palm, and for a while the rhythm made sense. The top 2 shelves empty, hooks unpegged. Paper labels slid out with a whisper. The pegboard's naked brown stared back at me, tired. I laid the hardware in neat lines in my cart, took a photo on my phone like proof against misremembering. The planogram had neat little squares showing where each family of products should live. It was just before 2 a.m. when Alicia's voice came through. When you can, a quick check on a spill in seasonal. It wasn't my zone, but it was my aisle's neighbor, and he. Helping made me feel less like a rook. I took a roll of paper towels and a cone, and when I came back, 10 minutes, 15 at most, 17 was built. Not fully, not in the way I would have done it, but the bones were there. Hooks rehung, every third hole, the kind of spacing you only get if you've done it a long time and your hands cut out measuring because they don't need to. A run of spatulas where the plan said tongs, the acrylic canisters on the second shelf instead of the third. The price strip slid in with a little flourish where the corner rolled and then tucked, a habit I'd seen in Ruth's Lane. For a second, my scalp prickled the way it did when the PA breathed. That small animal feeling that the room had been occupied while I wasn't looking. Who moved on 17? I asked on the radio, trying not to let anything bleed into my voice that would come back to bite me later. Silence. A beat. Then Manny. Not me. I was with the baler. Alicia. If you left it halfway and someone saw a hole, they might have tried to help fix it to the mod. Sensible. Clean. Except the peg labels in my cart had the new font, and the ones now slid under my fingers at the shelf had the old. One of them, $5.88, sat where $5.97 should be. Prices at our store almost never go down. I climbed the heavy ladder to check top stock because climbing felt like taking possession of the air. Midway up, the scent reached me, powder and a kind of clean that isn't cleaner, something people used to wear. Not perfume, not floral, more like the residue of soap and a hint of that Blue Bar hand lotion my grandmother kept by her sink. Below me, a cartwheel squeaked that familiar dry squeak of old rubber against tile. I can finish, I called out before I thought about how ridiculous it was to talk to air. I've got it, thank you though. The scuffing paused. I was too aware of my own breathing, too aware of how the store's hum felt different up at ladder height, the fluorescent beat closer to the skull. I stepped down and turned the corner towards Cizona. Because that's the theater of a moment like that. You go where the sound might have been. Blue caught my eye in the convex mirror at the aisle end. A vest hem. The squared-off silhouette of someone leaning into work, elbow flexing and straightening in the rhythm of rehanging pegs. I hate convex mirrors. They tell you the truth and then warp it just enough to make you chase. Hey, I said friendly, the way you do when you startle a coworker. The figure slipped right to left across the glass. By the time I made the left, the aisle was a tidy riot of cinnamon brooms and fall-stamped paper plates. Nobody. The cart track that should have been there wasn't. On the second shelf of 17, a peg had been rehung too tight, holes off by one, and it made the run sit proud by a notch the human eye isn't supposed to recognize and does if it needs to. I corrected it, angry at some anonymous helper who didn't respect my paper. I pushed the acrylic canisters back onto their rightful third shelf, and one of them, third from the left, fought me. Underneath, stuck between the shelf lip and the price strip, was a sliver of paper, coffee-ringed, thinner than what we print now. Planogram, 17. Date, 4 years before I'd been hired. The tiny map showed canisters on the second shelf. I held that slip in my fingers and felt something like a heartbeat, which is dramatic and maybe false. But there it is. Stop pranking me, I said, but softly, as if I might be overheard. The overhead speaker ticked and breathed, a dry little inhale like someone testing a line. Associate to Housewares, the voice said, so even and thin it could have been recorded in a room without walls. Thank you. The thank you landed flat, as if it had never been meant for a person to receive. I looked up and found my eyes searching the grid of acoustic tile for an answer that could be unscrewed and examined when I pulled the Gerard Ease pencil tallies from under the top stock with a rag. New marks were under them in faint pencil on the raw metal, not grease, just a name's first letter and a last initial. My stomach dropped for no rational reason. The letters were ordinary. The people around me were ordinary. The building hummed. I put the old planogram in my back pocket like contraband and worked the mod until it matched the paper, because sometimes obedience is a way to outlast a feeling. In the morning, my bay looked like I had both done my job and been corrected by someone more confident than me. That's the part that needled. If a stranger wrecks your bay, you get to be angry. If a stranger improves it but wrong, you get to be ungrateful. If a stranger returns it to a standard that contradicts the one in your hand and does it with the kind of muscle memory that suggests ownership, you get to be unsettled, which isn't a useful thing to be at 7 a.m. I tried the explanations first. Maybe a day vendor who serviced kitchen tools had decided to reface while I was in seasonal, using old shelf tags kept God knows why in some backroom drawer. Maybe I'd misread the printed mod. The little squares are easy to invert if you're tired. And the old paper I found was coincidence. Some fossil of a reset that had slid down the back of the strip and gotten stuck in that strange limbo where small things disappear. Alicia listened to all of that and nodded and handed me the same directive as always. If it's wrong by current paper, fix it. Document what you find. Keep moving. She did not humor me with talk of helpers, invisible or otherwise. Her steadiness is what kept my voice from shaking. Ruth looked at the bay and made a small approving sound that managed to be both compliment and warning. She kept it like this, she said, then cleared her throat as if she'd said a name and needed to cough it away. 17 remembers how it's supposed to look. Her mouth went tight, and in a softer voice, people get attached to their bays. You spend enough nights with something, you leave you. Your hand's in it when you go. I started to ask who, and she cut me off so gently I didn't feel cut. Don't bring people into it. Let the work be the work. She patted the shelf in a way that would have been strange in any other place. I wanted to be modern about it. The older vests felt symbolic more than real, outdated fabric carrying the stubbornness of past standards. I told myself I'd reset 17 that night and it would stay. I left a tiny tell only I would see. One measuring cup handle nested a little too far to the right so the logo half covered the price. I took a picture. I clocked out. The sky was the wrong color, and the birds were loud, and I drove home with the old planogram burning my back pocket like it had heat in it. When I came in that night, the handle sat where the mod said it should, not where I had left it, and my photo looked like a lie. I stared too long at a piece of plastic and felt stupid and exposed. I dabbed graphite on the underside of a peg with the corner of a pencil, a faint cross only I would recognize if it rubbed. 2 hours later, the cross was smudged as if a thumb had corrected it. Stop it, I said under my breath, but not like a threat. More like you talk to someone adjusting a picture frame in your house, someone who starts to feel like a housemate before you've invited them. I brought the old planogram to Manny because he has a friendly cynicism that often saves me from myself. He turned it over, sniffed it. Smells like the break room 15 years ago, he said, and I laughed because it was too specific not to be true, and then shrugged. People tuck things everywhere. You could shake the steel and build a second store from what would fall out. He looked like he was going to say more and stopped. Back when we switched vests, some folks refused, said the Navy kept them honest. You know how people get. He is not a superstitious man. And then, but he added, almost for himself, some bays keep their owners longer than they should. I started thanking the air when I left for break. Not out loud, not in a way anyone could catch. Just a little yes under my breath, the word you say when a cart lets you pass or a door opens because someone noticed you were there. It felt ridiculous and also right. The next morning I woke with my hands smelling faintly of a soap I didn't own, a powdery clean scent that lingered even after I washed. The edges of my fingers had that cling of static like the day in the break room when the navy fabric thread stuck to my skin and insisted on coming along. I never saw her face. That's the thing people always want to know when I tell this, and it doesn't matter. The most I saw were pieces. Hem, shoulder, name patch turned just enough to be illegible, the efficient tilt of someone on a ladder who knows exactly where they are in space. If I had seen her full on, I'd have to argue with the part of myself that believes eyes are where truth lives. This way, the argument didn't have anywhere to land. The bay would be perfect when I didn't have time to make it perfect and wrong when the paper said it had to be right. Sometimes the PA would breathe and say, associate to housewares with that too-even tone that sounded like memory. I fixed what I could fix and learned the shape of being helped by a set of hands I couldn't count during huddle. It made me better at 17 and worse at the inside of my head. Days later, Ruth put a little stack of old price clips in my palm. If they keep showing up, just swap them, she said. No need to pick a fight with yesterday. She didn't mean ghosts. She meant efficiencies and habits and the way buildings want what they had. Don't say her name, she added, and maybe it was for me, or maybe it was for herself, because then she left, and I stood very still in 17 and listened to the building breathe like it was counting along with me. The first time. They asked me to babysit self-check. I thought it would be easy. Stand near the gray islands with their polite screens, clear the occasional weight error, make human eye contact so people didn't steal razors out of shame more than intent. After midnight, though, self-check isn't for customers. By policy, we park them in maintenance, out-of-order screens idling in soft corporate blue, the scanner's LEDs dim to a sleepy ring. The whole corral smells like a strange mix. Warm dust from the fans, the plasticky sweetness of the bag rolls, a penny hint from the coin dispensers. The anti-fatigue mats grab your soles as if the floor wants to keep you, and if you stand still long enough, the machines talk to each other in little ticks and sighs like they have lungs. Our SEOs are numbered awkwardly because this building inherited its system from 2 remodels ago. Host Terminal calls them 21 through 28, though on the floor the stickers say 1 through 8. I'd seen a Lane 0 on a menu once when Manny was doing something only Manny knows how to do, and he'd grunted, "Ignore it. It's the heartbeat. It uses it. It's not real." That made sense in the way tech explanations do. Everything has a ghost process underneath that keeps time, that tests lines that you're not supposed to notice unless it goes wrong. Lane 0 felt like that. Background hum. That night, Alicia had me float between service desk and ESCO while Manny swapped out a screaming bearing in the floor scrubber. If you hear the bell and the desk is empty, pick up. If a customer slips past and tries to scan, just kill the lane, keys taped under the lip. She has a way of saying things that makes you believe things don't happen unless someone decides they do. It makes the building feel smaller, which is a relief until it isn't. The SCO host is a small, hot PC bolted under the attendant station. If you tuck your knees against the fake wood panel and duck your head, you can see a software dashboard with little boxes that go green when a lane is active, red when it's locked. The fonts are utilitarian, like lab equipment, and the logs march down the side with timestamps stacked like teeth. I'd learned enough to override a "please wait for assistance" and to print a quick X-read, which feels like looking at the skeleton of a shift. How many transactions? How many voids? How much cash supposed to be in a tray? We weren't closing, so no Z's, but I liked seeing numbers conclude. There's a serenity in a report that admits to being finished, even if you're not. It was a quiet night. The PA had behaved. Just the normal calls, no breath. Houseware 17 had behaved too, which made me feel like the building was letting me pay attention elsewhere. The garden gates were chained and still. Electronics was asleep with its eyelids rolled down. I stood at the attendant station and watched nothing become its own kind of something. The way the receipt printers preheated even though they didn't need to, curling up the first inch of paper like a shy tongue. The way the bagging scales recalibrated every few minutes with a small twitch. I could feel the second half of the shift lurching closer, that spot where you either eat or start to be eaten by your own blood sugar. On the host, the boxes were all red like they should be, lanes disabled. And then, like a trick of peripheral vision, one flickered green. Lane 0. My brain filed it where Manny told me to file it. Heartbeat, background, ignore. Still, when something alive blinks where you expect dead, your body notices. The little rectangle pulsed for exactly the length of a breath and then held, green steady. An alert bloomed to the right. Item scanned, PLU, and a number that didn't look like anything I'd memorized. The SCO chime, the friendly ding that normally requires a hand and a barcode, rippled through the corral. I told myself a test was running. It sometimes does that without telling anyone, and the mock. Ines like it because it gives them a reason to exist. I leaned in to clear the alert so it wouldn't stack up on some poor morning opener's log. The buttons offered me options that made my throat feel tight because they were the ones you only get when a human being needs a human attendant. Age verify. Approve weight variance. Void last item. My thumb hovered. The air in the corral felt fractionally cooler, the way the store does when the refrigeration kicks, as if the machines pulled heat in and kept it. I was alone except for the machines, which is a sentence I did not know how to feel about yet. I didn't press anything. The chime, the one we all joke about hearing in our sleep, sounded again, only the pitch was a hair too true, like a tuning fork in an empty classroom. The closest lane screen flashed from maintenance blue to the "Welcome, scan your first item," with the cheerfulness turned down. No power key had turned. The cylinder glinted in its off position like an eye that refuses to open. On the host, the log added a line. Lane 0, transaction start, 02-1703. I said out loud because talking makes ridiculous things reasonable. We're closed. The machine didn't care. A beep, the scale taking a breath. Place item in the bagging area, the speaker intoned, only it was the old voice pack, the one we used to have before an update smoothed it. The consonants were cleaner, the accent a little clipped. It was the kind of difference you don't notice unless you've heard both every night for weeks. The bagging scale registered a weight change, a few ounces, and then corrected itself. Unexpected item in the bagging area, the voice said, but kindly. On the host, the item list populated with words that were familiar and wrong. Not apples 4015 or bananas 4011, not the canned goods we see at 3 p.m., but the kind of general merchandise you shouldn't be able to weigh. Utensil set. 12 PC. 588 dice. The price hit me in the petty part of my brain that tracks numbers like weather. We didn't have anything at $5.88 in that set, not anymore. The price had gone up, the department code didn't match ours either, an older mapping. The next line came quick, picture frame, glass, 244. A weird sweetness climbed my throat, the one that comes when something dovetails with a memory you didn't know you had. The return at service desk that shouldn't have been possible with the frame we didn't carry. You start to see a shape because your brain insists there is one. I reached for the physical lane, a compulsion, like stopping a child's rocking, and my fingers went to the key taped under the lip. I turned it. The screen should have died. The LED ring around the scanner should have gone dull. Instead, the screen flickered, dark light dark, and then kept going as if I'd nodded rather than cut its power. The log, obedient, recorded my try. Attendant override, badge Nabalbawas. Approved. The badge number was mine. I hadn't scanned it. My badge doesn't scan there. The SCO readout added another need. Age verification required. Aerosol. Spray paint. The corral's voice asked for a yes that I didn't give and still received. Approved, the host wrote, tidy as a receipt. Hey, I said on the radio too tightly. Manny, are you in the front? Static, then his breath, then his voice carrying a smile he didn't entirely mean. On my way. Don't marry it. I wanted his practical hands in the corral, not because he believed in anything, but because he could turn a thing off. By the time he got there, the machine had rung 3 more beeps, slower than a shopper would, but sure. The bagging scale registered weight and then loss, as if someone with very precise hands placed items down and then thought better of it. The green box on the host insisted, customer scanning. Manny crouched and killed the power at the base. The fans sighed down, and for a second the sound in the corral was a grateful quiet. The host didn't care. Lane arrow active, it said, showing me an active transaction against a dead machine. The chime came again, this time from the speaker above us, rather than the dead unit. That made the hair along my arms do something I still have trouble putting words to. Manny's eyes crinkled around the edges, annoyed at a problem with too many layers. We'll clear the journal, he said. Sometimes the host hangs onto a phantom lane. Old map files. Watch. He typed like a man who speaks this language. The log spilled more than made sense. Voids, then re-adds, then a time code that stuttered 021714, 21714, 21713, as if the engine hiccuped backward. The PA clicked in the ceiling at the exact moment the time ticked wrong. Manager to Housewares 17, the old voice said from nowhere, and I felt something stitch 2 parts of my head together that had not asked to meet. Manny cussed softly in a dialect of machine, then printed the journal tape, because paper is proof even when it isn't. The tape fed out warm, the smell of thermal paper sweet and slightly chemical. He tore it and handed it to me, because I was the one who had been watching. It listed items we did and didn't carry, pricing none of us had updated in months. An attendant approval tagged with my badge number at a minute when I was 10 feet away not touching anything. The terminal ID read 00's darned. The date, in the corner, held a thing I couldn't rationalize, a very tidy 2358, as if the transaction had begun before the day had even agreed to turn into itself. At the bottom, where we used to have a cheerful, "Thanks for shopping, see you soon," the message read, "Thank you." Just that. No exclamation point. The font a hair thinner, the black softer, like the old labels in 17. We stood there, 2 people in a corral full of pause machines breathing their electronic breath. "It's a mapping issue," Manny said steady. "Lane 0 is a heart babe." "Eat," it burped. Maybe it pushed an old config. "Maybe your badge got cached from the time clock. It's just dumb electricity trying to make a line." He meant to settle me, and it works for him because he believes it. He shut down the host and brought it back up. Lane 0 disappeared like a hole in water closing. The next time a beep came, it was from the floor scrubber idling in the dark GM aisle, and I told myself my body was sweating because the corral had been warm. I kept the journal tape in my vest pocket until the paper curled so tight it tried to climb into itself. Thermal ink dies fast, and the numbers faded until the 0s and 1s held longer than the rest, a dumb digital poetry more legible than sense. I told myself the receipt was only as true as any paper in a store. A guide, not a gospel. I wrote the times down anyway because that's what I do when I don't understand. 021703, 021714, 2358, printed in a corner like a wink from a clock that liked to lie. When Alicia sent them our screenshots and Manny's notes, replied with a paragraph of answers that were probably right and did nothing for the part of me that had stood under the speaker and heard the corral chime from the ceiling. They said old voice packs sometimes cache on client machines even after updates. They said a test harness might have been left pointed at our host from a previous vendor call. They said lane 0 is not customer-facing and cannot print, which made me feel crazy when I angled the curling tape flat with my thumbnail, the letters softening under my touch like bruises. The night after and the one after that, I drifted past Esco like someone who forgot a word and kept circling to remember it. Nothing. The boxes on the host stayed red. The voice pack murmured only when a real body leaned too far on a mat and woke a lane by weight. The bagging scales recalibrated a reasonable number of times. I made myself stand in the corral and let my heart slow to the electronic hum to prove that I could. When a beep came from somewhere else, a pallet jack backing, a microwave in the break room, I monitored my reaction as if I were monitoring a child's fever. I started to hear the register chime in places it didn't belong. My apartment's oven makes a single polite tone when it reaches temp, and the first time it sounded, I turned toward my kitchen like the corral needed me and felt so stupid I had to laugh out loud to pop the bubble of it. The laugh didn't help. It just admitted the edge I carried home. I found the journal tape on my dresser 2 mornings later with a small dot of moisture at the bottom corner where I'd set a glass. The thank you blurred a little. I pressed the paper flat again and said, "Your paper," under my breath, like I needed the object to behave itself. Ruth doesn't like SEO. She says the machines pretend to understand when they don't, and shift all the tiny stresses onto people whose job is to fix what a screen told a person they did wrong. She saw me watching the corral and slid a look my way that felt like a pat on the shoulder. "You good?" she asked. I told her about the tape and the lane number and my badge showing where it shouldn't, leaving out the 2358 because I didn't want to watch that part look smaller as it left my mouth. Ruth made her thinking face, the one where she seems to look past you without making you feel invisible. "Sometimes the system remembers a person," she said. "Like if you used to be at a register and then you moved to a different role, the machine still wants your login because it's lazy and doesn't like change." She said it practical, but the words made me feel seen in a way that wasn't restful. It didn't stop, not every night. Not enough to be a pattern you could hang a diagnosis on, enough that the number 0 started to feel like a little soft bruise I'd palpate with my tongue. I'd be walking a return to its home, and the corral would bloom the old voice long enough to say, "Approved," even though no one had asked. I'd be pulling labels in 17, and the host would blink green for half a breath and then think better of it. Manny pulled the power and reseated cables and used words like bounce and cache and ghost lane without irony. It sent an update and then another. The old voice would vanish and then, at 0217, try to speak. I tried to make a religion out of routine. I wiped the attendance station down with the lemon cleaner I'd come to like. I refused to turn the key taped under the lip unless a body asked for help. I said the same thing to the same air if a lane woke without permission. "We're closed." The tape I kept, the second one because there were more, printed a different oddness. A total that went negative after a void that no one processed, a time that stamped 021715, and then in the corner, the receipt footer from a previous software build. We do not write the thank you message ourselves. We don't have that power. And yet it was different. A hair thinner, the way the old price labels feel when you press them between your fingers. If there's a reason for any of it, it lives in a layer I don't have access to. Electrons, server times, a test harness pointing at the wrong endpoint, a heartbeat mistaken for a person. That would be neat, and I would take it. Except my badge number still populated the attendant approval field when I was 6 feet away with my hands in my pockets. Except on the nights when the PA breathed my name, the lane 0 logs time-stamped within the same minute as the click. I kept my lists and didn't show them to anyone because the lists made the shape worse, not better. On my last week before I moved off SKO duty for a run, I was closing a cardboard box at the desk when a receipt slithered out from under the printer like a tongue. The printers were off. I'd checked them twice. The paper was warm anyway. It read, "Lane 0, transaction void, attendant, my name." The date field was empty. The time was 11:58, just numbers in a corner like a joke I should have outgrown. At the bottom, the thank you had lost even its period. It just sat there, blank and polite, like breath held and waiting. I folded it once, then again, then slid it into my vest. The navy thread caught on the seam, snagging my skin, as if the fabric knew what the machines knew. If the building wants your name, it learns to say it, even if the only mouth it's got is a chime and a thermal head and the soft hiss of a speaker that remembers another voice. They train me on dairy and frozen because nights go short, and if you can count cases without losing your fingers to cold and math, you get asked back. The grocery side lives on a separate weather system. Daylight doesn't reach the aisle tops out there. The open bunkers breathe fog around your ankles. The glass-doored freezers make the aisle buzz like bee-thick summer. Behind all of it sits the walk-in, two really. The dairy cooler's big metal room with a fatigue in its bones, and the frozen box, smaller, meaner, a squared-off storm. We wore puff jackets that made us look like we belonged to an expedition no one would photograph. There's a particular smell in a cooler, the clean metal and sour milk mix that's not unpleasant exactly, just assertive, like the room intends to be remembered. The frozen box has less smell, more texture. The air bites. When you breathe, your nose makes a sound. The floor crunches under your shoes where humidity became permanently yesterday. The fans above your head sound like airplanes committed to staying put. Manny walked me through the ritual the first night. "Check the panic release," he said, slapping the luminous paddle next to the walk-in latch. It glowed a soft, reassuring green even with the overheads off. "Chalk the door. If you're in alone, you wedged." He said wedged like a verb. He kicked a rubber block under the door so the hinge couldn't fully seal. "This isn't a movie. If it shuts, it opens. But don't teach the building habits you'll regret." He meant, don't give it a chance. The door has a tiny window, polycarbonate, cloudy from scratches, the kind of view that turns shapes into guesses. We started chalking the edge after a night shift swore he found the door pulled to when he didn't leave it that way. A pencil line across the gasket at the 12 o'clock position. Make a mark, own the before. At the end, you make sure you can line it up with itself. The first time I did it, the chalk skipped along ridges in the rubber like it had been marked and wiped and marked again in generations. Hands remember. Gaskets too. Inventory in the cold is counting while parts of you lie to you. Fingers tell you they're fat. They're not. Your breath tells you it's heavy. It is. The zebra scanner hates the cold. Its screen's sluggish, latency turning each beep into a small mercy. I held it under my jacket between scans like a bird. Cases of waffles, pizzas. The bulk ice cream with names that make you think of summer you didn't have. You count in stacks. 442, call it 10. Knowing if you're wrong by one, no one will die. Except some mornings it feels like that's the point. The building wants you to believe numbers have blood. When your knuckles knock steel in a room like that, the sound climbs and then drops as if it got tired on the ascent. I did it by habit. 2 taps on a shelf to wake the feeling out of my hands. Somebody had told me once that expansion and contraction could knock back. "Works like language if you're new enough," Manny said. He didn't say it to spook me. He said it the way he says everything, mechanically honest. If it answers you, it's refrigerant lines talking to themselves. You're eavesdropping. Still, the frozen box had the kind of personality I recognized from people who make a lot of noise and then stare at you until you supply a story. The latch sat colder than the room should make it, frost filming the outside handle on a night we had warm air pushing from bakery. I pressed my thumb to it and felt the print lift in slow pain. The frost was on the wrong side, I told myself. It's not wrong. It's just physics, I told myself right after. I learned to step in and let the door press against the wedge behind me, to keep the hinge's memory from settling into closed. 0217 hangs in this story the way it hung in all the others, but I didn't know it yet. The data logger in the cooler scrolled temperatures like a patient heart. Defrost cycle at 0202, hold at or 10. It wrote a new dot every 5 minutes, a tiny green constellation on a strip you could tear and tape to a clipboard. Proof your milk didn't kill anyone. Proof your cherries stayed hard. If that paper is scripture, I grew up faithless. But I learned to read it because the alternative is listening only to your nerves, and your nerves are opportunists. They don't care about truth, they care about survival. On the second week, Alicia pointed at the dairy rotation with her pen and said, "Stay out of frozen if you're alone," then added, "Unless you're behind and you need to, which is retail for I trust you to pick your poison." The chalk lived on a nail by the door, the wedge liked to wander away, and the fan above sang a thin pitch behind the normal roar, like someone had pressed a finger to a glass and was circling the rim. I thought of the building lungs Manny talks about and pictured this room like it had gills. I learned a way to hold the box cutter and gloves. I learned to count to 20 without hearing the numbers. I learned to let the cold mean only cold. The door had other ideas. It was a Tuesday night turned Wednesday, the thin part of the week where you forget there are other shifts. I'd made the chalk line and set the wedge and pushed the door with my hip. The room swallowed the store noise like a pond takes a stone. Fans, my breath, the zebra in my jacket beating its faint stucco heartbeat against my ribs. I started the count. Waffles first because they're front, then pizza, then the weird back corner where the floor slopes and pallets think about moving. 2 taps on the lower shelf. Habit. The metal answered 2 taps back. I smiled into my scarf because I dead to be the kind of person who treated physics like a friend. Hello. 2 taps again, out of rhythm. The fan's tone shaped the second tap into something a hair longer, enough to feel seen by an object. I don't know if I would have noticed the handle if I hadn't already been listening. The latch took a breath. I know how that sounds. The frost on the exterior handle, the wrong side, fluffed like something warming it from within had exhaled. Frost doesn't bloom like that. It grows by hold. I stepped back so the wedge earned its keep. It held. The fans pressed air around my ears until sound started being more feel than hear. The zebra beeped after its little nap and made me jump and made me laugh at myself. "Stop it," I said to nothing. I stacked cases. My eyelashes salted. The case straps sang occasionally where plastic tightened. My brain's catalog of normal sounds sorted and labeled, which is how it missed the first real knock. Not my knock, not Expansion's conversational ping, flat and knuckled on the inside of the door at shoulder height, 3 in a row, measured. I looked at my own hands as if they'd launched themselves and were waiting to be collected. Then I backed toward the door by instincts I've decided are older than sense. I pressed my glove to the polycarbonate window and saw nothing but a wash of my own shadow and the wedge, a small, dark triangle 3 feet beyond. The chalk line had smeared toward 1 o'clock. Not wiped, smeared, like a thumb had leaned and dragged. I put my finger next to the mark to compare sizes and hated myself for it in the same moment because what was I trying to prove? That a thumb is a thumb? The fans hiccuped a microsecond the way they do at the beginning of a defrost cycle. The room's pitch changed like a choir caught a new key. 3 more knocks. I touched the safety release in a reflex of gratitude, the cool plastic Rios. Sirring. I pushed the door. It pushed back against the wedge. I should have left then. Retail teaches you to finish a count even when nothing needs counting. "Okay," I said out loud, and my voice went small in the fan thunder. "Okay, I hear you." If there'd been a camera in that box, I could have used the footage to argue with myself later. The dome stuck to the corner was empty, just conduit running to a plate that had given up pretending to hold an eye. We don't monitor inside as a rule. You can die by policy or by accident. Either way, enough paperwork accumulates to suggest you lived. A case slid somewhere deeper in the room, the soft sound of corrugate whispering against corrugate. Not a drag, a correction, like a body executes when someone squeezes past them and grazes. I backed down the narrow canyon between pallets, my gloves skating the shelf edge as if a handrail lived there. The fans rose, dropped, rose. I planted my knuckles and tapped twice because that had worked before to reframe the entire world as simple. 4 knocks answered, 2, then 2 in a slightly different tempo, the way you might do it if you were trying to match someone and didn't quite. "I'm leaving," I said to the general concept of otherness, and pulled the door. It held to the wedge, and then gave. The hinge sighed warm air along my cheek like a dog. As I stepped through, something brushed my shoulder, a weightless static more than a push, and it could have been my jacket talking to itself except the chalk line, when I caught a last glimpse back, had 2 new smears, parallel, like fingers had tested the gasket. The polycarbonate window fogged over from the inside in a pattern my body recognized before my brain did. It looked like breath. Not mine. The center clear, the edges feathered, then an oval ghosting higher up as if someone else had tested their hair to see if it would ice. I felt my own loo. And jazz work, which is not what lungs are for, being noticed. I chalked the door hard enough to bruise the wedge and watched it like a person does when they have caught a pet in a trick and want the pet to admit it. The chalk trembled to stillness. The fans went on. The datalogger's green LED blinked its tempo. 5 minutes to the next dot. Through the tiny window, the room receded to white and steel. If the knocks had been a game played by temperature, then I had interrupted it with my wanting, which is not science and also not wrong. Manny's boots scuffed behind me. He saw my face and swung his hands into his jacket pockets so he wouldn't reach for a joke. "You good?" "Expansion," I said a little too fast. "It's expansion." I showed him the chalk smears like proof has to be tactile to be proof. He leaned in. His breath didn't fog the polycarbonate very much. He runs warm. "Gasket's swollen in that sector," he said. "You get a defrost in a room this old shifts. Latch can rock in the channel. You can get the feel of a push. Stop leaving your chalk line like a person. Mark both sides so you're not giving the rubber a personality test." It was the best sentence I'd ever heard. I wanted to laugh and cry both. He rechalked with practical grace. A cross at 12 and a matching on the door. Unignorable geometry. "If it moves, he said. No ghost required." I nodded like a student being released, saying thank you with my jaw. While he walked, he knocked a little drum solo on the metal as he passed it, like petting. The room didn't answer, which is maybe why I looked back. A handprint bloomed in frost at shoulder height on the inside of the door just below the window. 4 fingers in a palm, the thumb skewed a little sideways like a person with a stiff joint might place it. It faded while I watched. A reverse flower. I did not say anything. Manny's back was Getty's. Smaller down the aisle, and I didn't trust my ability to describe it without turning it into a story. The chalk cross held. The wedge held. The data logger blinked and went on. I told myself I had rehearsed calm enough times to perform it. I went back in an hour later with another stack of pizzas and found the chalk line where it should be. The wedge where Manny had kicked it to. The gaskets behaving like indifferent rubber. I knocked and got a ping back that sounded exactly like contraction on a night that decided it was done with weather. I let that answer be it, but my body had already given the moments prior an address. Shoulder height inside of door, 3, then 4 knocks, breath. The immediate problem with experience like that is you don't get to be brave for the rest of the night. You have to be average. You go work your list. You pretend to be the kind of person who thinks gasket is the whole of it, and sometimes that's the bravery. You don't let the building bully you into thinking poetry is law. Alicia caught a look at me in the aisle, whatever expression you wear when your skin feels too sharp, and pointed a chin toward the break room. I went. The coffee tasted burnt and heroic. I cupped the heat and watched my hands not shake. They didn't. It made me love them. I drew tiny versions of the door on a napkin. Chalk line, wedge, smear. I wrote 0217 and wished it were a riddle with a prize. When I finally checked the green dot tape, the defrost cycle had stepped into its decline at 0210 like an obedient machine. The temperature line, notched teeth marching, showed a petty flutter at 0215, a single dot just shy of the previous rhythm. If you squinted, you could turn it into anything. Manny wrote a maintenance request for the latch. Door behavior inconsistent during defrost, he wrote, which is a way of not lying. Ruth, who had the dairy rotation and practical hands, saw the chalk and made her small noise, the one that means an opinion is walking through her. Some folks knock to say they're in there, she said years ago, no camera. No radios on some nights. You'd bang so nobody pallet jacked you in by accident. She looked at the chalk, not me. If you hear it, knock back so we all keep that language. Her mouth tugged like she thought she'd said too much. Don't put your name inside the door, she added softly. Some people used to do that. Make a mark. I don't like it. She walked her card away like a decision. I tried the rational experiments because they are the only kind I know how to run. I dusted a little flour along the door edge where the chalk met rubber, then worried about ants and swept it up and hated myself for giving a freezer something alive to consider. I pulled my glove off and pressed a bare fingertip to the inside metal long enough to get a print when I had someone with me, just to show myself what it looked like when a human touched it. The print came sharper than I expected, loops and ridges like a map. The handprint I had watched bloom had been less precise. That should have helped. It didn't. Ambiguity is generous. It always leaves room for the worst version of what you think. That night and others, I kept my list. I added the knocks as if quantity would make meaning. I wrote 0217, knock X3, chalk smear 121. I wrote breath on window, oval high. I wrote Manny, mark cross, no movement observed. I waited for an obvious cause, a coworker with a mean sense of humor, a kid in the back with time to kill, the building flexing in a way I'd see coming. The cause did not arrive like an announcement. It arrived like a certainty I couldn't make into words, that I wasn't alone in the language the room used. It followed me home in the dumbest ways. My apartment has a cheap fridge with a seal that complains when the weather swings. It made a pop and a soft tap the night after, and I answered, knuckles on the counter, before my brain caught my hand. I laughed, and the laugh sounded like metal. The bathroom mirror fogged after a too-hot shower, and I had to sit on the edge of the tub to not touch it and write a name because Ruth's "don't" had installed itself as law. I dreamed of industrial breath, not a person in the dream, just sound, and the place in your chest where your body matches it, a pendulum trying to sync with a larger clock. After a week of behaving, the frozen door gave me one more thing I don't know how to categorize. I left a little okay in the frost inside, index finger, 2 letters, because I was tired of guessing the shape of the other side, because friendship with inanimate things has gotten me through more jobs than pride ever did. I wiped it immediately with the side of my glove, embarrassed by my own need. 2 hours later, when I went back for ice cream, the polycarbonate showed an okay from the inside again, the letters reversed by contact, like a stamp had been made from the idea of my earlier wish. The lines were wider than a finger, as if a palm had been used. The chalk cross above it sat undisturbed. I held the door and did not call Manny. I watched my breath try to match the blur. I tell you this, knowing you'll hear it how you need to. Expansion knocks. Gaskets swell. Heat moves where it wants, and water tells you a story about edges and pressure. I believe those things because not believing them makes the world all blade. And also, sometimes the room knocks back in a rhythm you didn't choose. Sometimes the handprint fades because time wants it, not because you imagined it. Sometimes a door that everyone can open chooses to feel closed. I keep the chalk by the nail. I wedge the door with care. I count my cases and write my times, and when the fans slip key and the room changes pitch, I say hello so softly I can tell myself I didn't. I haven't written my name on the inside of the door. It doesn't need me to. It knows. I liked Garden Center for reasons that didn't make sense until I tried saying them out loud. It's the outdoors taught to pretend it's inside. At night, the tarps hung slack over the chain-link letters. Kia held breath, and the roof, half tin, half open grid, made the stars look like they'd been pixelated and then turned down to zero. The smell out there is different from the store's lemon and plastic. Potting soil sweet and mineral, cedar mulch sharp as a pencil shaved too fast, wet metal and a trace of fertilizer that lives in your teeth for an hour if you breathe with your mouth open. The cement holds days' heat longer than it should, then gives it back to your ankles long after your head has admitted the night. Closing garden means counting locks like you're talking yourself out of a panic. There's the interior double doors that slide to a grudging stop, the roll down over the cash lane, the padlock through the main gate's chain, the little side gate latch that never quite lines up and makes men cuss softly to themselves while they lean their weight against it. Propane sits in a fat metal cage with its own set of rules I was trained on and hoped never to need. The decorative everything goes in, gazing balls like jellyfish, concrete rabbits that would break a toe, solar lights with filament hearts barely alive, wind chimes hang high where customers can hear them and imagine peace, and we leave them up because the idea sells things better than the pricing ever will. Alicia assigned me to garden for a week because I kept volunteering to take the long walk to throw cardboard, and she's got the kind of brain that notices who isn't afraid of quiet. Patio sets are shrink magnets, she said, tapping a list that made my night longer and somehow simpler. Wire off the floor models, check the trellis latch twice. No vendors after midnight. If you see anybody say they're a vendor at that gate, send them to me on the radio. She doesn't have to add, don't go out there without your radio. The inside of my elbow already knew it. Manny walked me through the quirks like he always does. This gate catches if it's humid, he said, shoulder to chain link, body leveled like a carpenter. Use the second link from the end, not the third. The third just looks right. He wiped at a camera dome with the corner of his shirt. A spider had written its own version of motion detected in sticky cursive across the lens, and the IR would flare off the silk like headlights in fog. These cameras love to go blind out here. If you need proof of anything, get it with your eyes. The recorder will promise and then cough at you. The wind, real wind, doesn't reach that corner often. The building's big lungs exhale warm air through ducts that vent near the roofline, and every so often a pulse rolls down the tarps like the idea of weather. I learned the way the plastic bellies out, then pulls back. I learned which pieces creak because of rust and which because they've begun to remember people. The owl decoys, two glaring plastic birds with bobbleheads that are supposed to discourage sparrows from building in the beams, spooked me until they didn't, and then they spooked me again when they turned their faces without anybody touching them. You can set them to pivot, Manny said. You can lock them too. No one ever locks them, he added like a dare. I chalked the trellis latch because the freezer had taught me that chalk is a whole language. A tiny white line across the hook where it met the loop, a matching nick on the frame, before and after. I told myself that way I couldn't be hustled by misremembering. The trellises were the light metal kind, a little too flimsy to be useful, but pretty enough to sell. They swung just enough on their display that the tiniest pull at the right angle would work the latch free. I made a note on a napkin. Line up marks. Tie off lower rung. A plant tie, the soft Velcro kind, sat in my vest. Pocket. Green as a leaf, and the exact shade a store uses to pretend it knows what a garden is. Nights out there had their own wildlife. A cat uses the roofline like a private highway after closing. I caught its eyeshine once in the IR of the one camera that decided to function as it should. Crickets made a thread sound from some impossible corner. The highway a quarter-mile off hissed like a rash you can't quite scratch. Occasionally the building sneezed, ducks doing their ducks, and the tarps shivered. When the wind chimes sang, it was usually because a customer brushed them on the way out. After midnight, they were just merchandise, silent. That's how I filed it. I made my rounds with the radio down low and nobody paging for anything. Housewares was behaving. The SCOE were dark and obedient. The chalk line sat chalk straight. The chain had a neat bite where the lock rested in it, and the owl decoys faced out, yellow eyes fixed on a world we locked away. It felt like the kind of quiet you get paid to disturb, so I did my job. Counted, tugged, tied, told myself the wind is only wind until it decides not to be. The night it started, the air was vacuum still. You could hear the idea of a breeze if you wanted to, the faintest movement from ducks above our heads. But the tarps hung patient against themselves, and the dangling price tags on planters didn't do the tiny sway they do when air passes. I'd just refaced a row of pot saucers, those shallow discs that arguments about overwatering live on, and their glazed edges clacked a little when I bumped the shelf. The sound traveled, found the chain link, and returned to me thinner like a whisper someone meant to keep. At 2:14, according to the clock I only looked at because of habit, the chimes went off. Not a brush, not a single ring. The whole cluster of them, birds and bars, bamboo and metal, rippled a sequence that you could... I stood with my palms still on a stack of potting mix that had been wiped down 3 times that shift, feeling the sound hang around the bag like dust. That's HVAC, I told myself. It kicked. The tarps didn't move. The tags didn't sway. The chimes chimed. There are things you can lie to yourself about if everything else helps. Nothing else did. I went toward it because I have learned about myself that not going just means bringing the sound inside your head with you. The chimes live up high, and there's a spot near the trellis display where you can catch them in the corner of your eye and see if you were imagining them moving. I found one still dancing, the longest of the aluminum tubes stilling last like a stubborn child, but the air around it was nowhere. Still, close as a room you've sealed for painting. A neat curl of tarp hung near the corner, and even that read flat. "Okay," I said to the nonsense of it, and got my reward, a soft skitter from the ground near the pallet of raised bed kits, like something shimmying out from under the wood and deciding to hide in plain sight. "Manny," I said into the radio, hating the way the word lodged in my throat like I'd said it for the sake of someone to hear me saying it. Static. His voice came a second later, lazy with focus. "Front is mine. You need me?" "No," I said quickly, "just checking something in garden." He didn't say don't, so I kept going. The owl decoys had turned. It wasn't dramatic. Their heads pivoted on their little bearings so the beaks pointed in toward the main store doors, as if watching the sliding glass like it was interesting television. I had not locked their heads earlier. I hadn't done anything to them but walk past thinking that fakes work because they look stubborn from a distance. Up close, the plastic feathers soften into suggestion and the seam down the back line up to a manufactured size. Pine. I turned them out again the way you do with a shoulder reading too much into a room. One of the owls fought a little, a click and a give, as if the mechanism had already chosen a direction and was insulted to be told different. The trellis latch had crept in that plodding way motion uses to pretend it's innocent. The little chalk tick-eyed mark sat a breath to the right of its partner, just enough to annoy you if you're the kind who notices. I pressed against the frame and reseated the hook, chalk to chalk. The metal squeaked a little and then thought better of it. I added the green plant tie, wrapping twice and fastening with the sound of fabric pretending to be leaves. "There," I said to the idea of sabotage. A bag of soil 6 feet away settled with a low, crunchy sigh, the air leaving it like a resigned person. I put my hand on the stack to feel for a slope. Flat Dura 217 arrived like my body knew about it before my eyes reached a clock. The chimes went again, gentler this time, a 2-note acknowledgement that didn't stir the little paper tags, and at the same moment the plant saucers, light, skittery things, shivered into a clatter. No one thing fell. The entire column made a sound as if something with a tail had threaded itself through them, and the tail said sorry on the way past. The owl heads followed it. I watched their beaks pivot with a tiny stiffness, a degree or two, the yellow eyes catching the sodium light and turning coin bright. They stopped pointed where I was not, as if triangulating a corner I couldn't see. I set my teeth and set my foot. "Stop," I said, ridiculous, and put my palm against the trellis as if my hand could teach it stillness. The green tie lifted against my skin a millimeter, then settled back like a breath you take when someone touches your arm without asking. I looked for the obvious lie, the slack I'd left in the knot, the Lee of the hook. But I'm careful in that small, stubborn way people taught to count cases become. The chalk line blurred toward 12:30. "Associate to Garden Center," the PA said in the old voice from the ceiling tile that doesn't exist out here, and I felt my eyes go wet with that wrong mix of relief and humiliation, the one you get when the universe says yes to the exact thing you're in the middle of denying. I swallowed like there was something in my throat besides air. I did what I was supposed to. I reseated the latch. I retied the tie. I tipped a saucer stack back into itself so each flare sat clean. I steered the owl heads outward with the gentle insistence you use for toddlers and elderly men. The chain at the main gate clicked twice without moving, as if metal talking to itself. The camera beyond the corner blinked its little red IR eye, which meant the motion sensor had decided to wake up. And when I glanced at the attendant monitor later, the timeline hiccuped at 02:17:14, a smear of grayscale and then a skip to 02:17:16, as if the recorder had cut a sneeze out of the night. There was nothing on either side but the shape the chimes made as they moved and then stilled, and the owl heads had turned again, patient as teachers. I wanted wind. I wanted a draft, a pocket of air pulling where the building's lungs make pressure games along the roofline. I wanted physics, any physics, even the kind I barely understand, but trust the way you trust the bones in your own feet. Manny walked out with a set of heavier clips and a length of chain that used to belong to a pressure washer. He hung his weight on the trellis, watched the latch behave like it had manners, then pointed to the roof. "Stack effect," he said. "Hot air goes up, pulls new air through holes. The tarps turn those holes into flutes. Anyone tells you a chime rang out of nowhere, you tell them to walk to the front and feel the doors breathe." He locked one owl's head and left the other free. "You don't want both static," he added, which Diaz's philosophy, but like most of Manny's sentences, is just his hand talking in the voice of hardware. Ruth came through later with a pallet jack loaded with herb starts that should have been put to bed hours ago. "Garden's a gossip," she said, lovingly disdainful. "It will tell you everything about everything if you let it. That's why we chain it." She gave the chimes a look that was either affectionate or tired. Some of the old-timers used to hang a tiny bell at each corner. If two rang together, they went in pairs. If three, they called a manager because something had gotten itself open that shouldn't be. That was before the tarps, when it was all chain link and air. She touched the plant tie I'd fastened and nodded like I'd done something that would satisfy other people more than it satisfied me. "Don't sleep with dirt under your nails," she added on her way out, which felt like a grandmother's warning, and also a technical note about fungus. I tried to be sensible. I told myself about cats and raccoons and the kind of bird that can fit through rectangles you wouldn't bet a body could. I set a penny on a saucer edge in a way that would make it jump if a vibration traveled through the stack, then found it on the concrete 2 hours later. Rolled under the shelf without a sound I could convince myself I would have heard. I made a chalk mark not just across the trellis latch, but along the inside of the channel where the hook rocks, a crosshatch like tallying days on a cell wall. In the morning, one of the hatches had an echo next to it that biased left, as if a hand with a different slant had tried to match me and then given up. Chalk can be a liar. It also remembers. The camera gave me nothing useful. Manny pulled the file, and we watched the IR freeze just long enough to skip the exact piece of time where the chimes on the north end moved without moving air. On either side, the owl's head sat outward. We could hear the plastic joint work in the microphone a second before the picture hopped and it ended up inward again. Manny muttered about cheap encoders and leitmotifs of moisture and glare. He exported a clip for me anyway, and when I watched it that afternoon, home and wrong side awake, the frame hiccuped precisely at 02:17:14, like a tired calendar catching itself. The trellis didn't stop. Some nights I found the chain an inch lower like it had thought about being undone and then lost interest. Twice, the green plant tie was missing even though it takes effort to pull those little hooks apart. Once I found a tie on the concrete that wasn't mine, older, brittle, that sun-faded green from seasons back. And for a heartbeat, I didn't know whether I'd dropped it and it had aged in those 7 hours the way receipts do, or whether the building had been playing longer than I'd admitted. I started writing little dates on the end of each tie with a Sharpie. I never caught anything in that act but myself. At home, my apartment tried a new trick. A neighbor had hung a decorative chime in the shared breezeway, and when it went in a wind that never made it to my window, I had to sit down on the kitchen floor and breathe like the building had taught me, and while the fans rose, out while they dropped. The sound is pretty in the day. At 2 in the morning inside your head, it's a memory of being looked at by a plastic owl and not understanding why that should matter. I cleaned soil out from under my nails in the sink with a nail brush I didn't own the week before and pictured Ruth frowning and nodding like I was finally doing something core. "Yeah, you want an answer? I do too. I have a list of maybes that try on certainty in the mirror and don't fit. Wind finds holes and makes flutes. Air is lazy and always reaches for balance. Tarp's belly with the smallest pressure change. Plastic gets a memory and follows it even when you think you've taught it a new habit. Cats learn a store better than you ever will. People leave objects posed in ways that make sense to them, and you arrive later and call it a haunting. All of that settles into the part of me that needs a world with reasons. And also, the chimes sang when nothing else sang. The saucers clacked in sympathy with a tale I didn't see. The trellis unhooked inside the chain. The owls turned their heads and watched something I couldn't. And when I set them outward, one resisted like I was interrupting a conversation it was having with doors that slid inside. I still chalk the latch. I still use Manny's heavier chain and make satisfaction happen with my shoulder. I keep a plant tie in my vest and write dates on the ends, as if time behaves better when numbered. On nights when the building feels thin and my radio isn't saying any names I know, I stop and garden and check the owls. I give one a polite turn and leave the other to its choice. If the chimes go in air that doesn't move, I say hello and finish my count because I have learned that you can acknowledge a thing without naming it, and that's sometimes the only way to live. I lock the gate with the second link, not the third. I tug twice. The chain answers with a small, convincing thunk, and the silence after is exactly the length of a breath, the kind the building takes when it is pleased with how people behave inside it. If the sales floor is a stage, the backroom is the scaffolding you're not supposed to see. It smells like warm cardboard, battery acid, and dust that has opinions. The concrete is painted with rules, yellow lines, hash marks, foot silhouettes, none of which tell you what a night actually asks for. Freight lives in a Tetris that changes mid-game. Steel uprights rise into a mez that doesn't end so much as fade into shadow, each bay mouth identical until you realize your brain has started filling in differences that aren't there. Receiving doors yawn along one wall like a mouthful of teeth, they open only for the truck. The baler snores. The compactor waits like a bad idea. Alicia gave me a clipboard and a pushcart and a set of don'ts that were really please do's. Pull your picks from row F through H first. We've got overstock we can push to GM. If you don't know where you are, stop and reset. Don't trap yourself with a pallet you can't move. Don't walk under forks. Don't ride forks. She said it like she's said it 100 times because she has, because someone always thinks the tines look like a ladder. Manny drew me a map on a sheet of scrap, a rectangle with smaller rectangles inside, labeled F, G, H, like a grade you can't change. Clockwise, he said. Always. Compactor to receiving to steel to GM, then out. If you can hear the baler, you're near. If you hear produce fans, you're lost. If you hear bakery, you've gone through the world and come out wrong. He handed me a handful of cut-off zip ties, ends trimmed from previous wraps. Breadcrumbs, he said. Tie them to the inner posts when you take a turn you don't trust. Don't leave trash. Leave a note only you'll read. He means practical magic, the kind that has a reason if it works and a shrug if it doesn't. The zebra's strap bit into my palm in a familiar way. The app is crude, all gray boxes and small font. But it knows bin locations like a librarian knows stacks. GM row F07, bay 03 top. Scan bin, scan item, beep, load. It has a location feature I never trust. A little breadcrumb trail lighting as you move, triangulated by our access points, good enough to find you until it decides you're in 3 places at once. You'd think the sameness of steel would make the device sure. It does the opposite. Sometimes it draws my path like a kid shaking a marker on a paper. Dots every few feet, jittering. The backroom hums at a different pitch than the floor. Fluorescents run colder. The HVAC exhales right into the ductwork above the steel, a long sigh that smears sound into a gray wash. The backup beep of the reach truck is supposed to be a safety blanket. Regular, honest. But at 1:30 it threads through the bays like it's learned shortcuts. You hear it from row H and then, impossibly, from behind the compactor where there is no aisle. Manny's amber beacon throws a slow carousel of light when he moves, and sometimes I catch the spin in a convex mirror and think he's near until the radio tells me he's up front nursing the scrubber back to obedience. Dust is its own weather back there. It coats the top stock in a soft version of itself, tracks your fingers if you forget gloves. The old labels on steel, faded print from 2 resets ago, peek from under the newer ones if the tape gives, like a past state insisting on co-writing the present. There's a style to the way people route their chords in rolls of stretch. Some leave a tail, some fold tidy, so you can tell who last ran a pallet by the signature of leftover habits. I told myself that would keep me oriented. I tied my first zip tie to F001's inner post, snipped end facing south, a tiny arrow I could read later. It felt silly. It felt like trust. The zebra chirped me toward a bin in G. I could smell bananas nowhere, which meant I was safe. E from produce. I counted my steps in Manny's clockwise, glancing at the little digital crumbs on the screen. They wobbled. The beep from the reach truck came through a row that didn't connect to me. Stick to the line, I said out loud to my feet. In the back room, sometimes you have to talk to the part of you that panics before it begins. The night the back room ran long, the freight looked reasonable. One cage of toys, a pallet of pet food, an avalanche-prone stack of paper towels. I had a precise list which felt like armor. GM Row G12 Bay 02 top, a blender that had been misslotted to small appliances instead of housewares. Then F10 Bay 04 mid, wax melts, seasonal throwaways that are always both overstock and understock because they exist in two realities at once. Clockwise, I passed the compactor, its little red eye in sleep. I tied a zip tie at F04, the end pointing toward the garden side wall. The steel and the floor and the yellow line said I moved forward. My body believed them. The zebra's breadcrumb line hiccuped, drew a second echo path a bay to my left, then decided I existed in both. Low signal, check Wi-Fi, it suggested, cheerful as a nurse. I scanned under the bin lip at G12, label sleek and new, the barcode printing sharp enough to feel. Beep! The device flashed green. Location confirmed, then reconsidered and ghosted a second dot 2 bays away in H. Whoa, I said, trying to make a joke out of the part that didn't want to be here alone. The reach truck beeper blossomed to my right, and then, this is the thing that didn't map, passed through the space like water under a door. A soft Doppler, a suggestion of motion where nothing could move because the row terminates in a wall of stacked seasonal signage. The convex mirror at the end of H threw me a curved little movie. Amber strobe turning, glimpse of a steel post, the shimmer of shrink wrap in a breath of air that... T never reached me. "Manny," I said to the radio. He answered from the front with a screwdriver in his mouth. "Scrubber's guts are out. You good?" "I'm good," I said, lying in the way that protects the part of a lie that thinks it's kindness. The maze began in small ways. I turned left because left takes you deeper, and I needed deeper to get to G12. I passed the blue tote with the Sharpie scrawl, elect cables, that always sits at F09. I passed a broken pallet plank I'd noticed earlier, gave it a wide berth. I tied a zip tie to G03 with the tail pointing toward the baler like a compass needle. I passed the same blue tote. I passed the same broken plank. I told myself there are many blue totes, many broken planks, and I was not the first person to think sameness meant a loop. My body believed it and didn't. The zebra tried to help. It pinged me, approaching G12, happy, then, "You seem far from G12, disappointed." It threw up a map I didn't recognize. The aisles labeled wrong. Some ghost schematic from a remodel we didn't get. F was now E. H was a corridor we don't have. The timestamp blinked 02-16-58, blinked thoughtful, and then 02-17-03. The app sighed and rebooted itself, little android belly dancing, and when it came back it asked me to sign in again like we hadn't been in this together. I signed, thumb clumsy with cardboard dust. It put my blue dot at receiving and at steal at once. 2 freckles on a gray face. For a second I wanted to laugh, then I didn't. I did what Manny said. I stopped. Reset. I touched the steel to know I was touching something that existed. I took a breath that tasted like pallets. I turned clockwise again. The baler, if you listen long enough, makes a sound like a bigger heartbeat beneath its quiet. I honed on that. I tied a zip tie to H01 with its tail down. I came out into the aisle near the compactor like a diver finding their own bubbles. Except, and this is nothing, this is only a detail that spins in my head, the tie at H01 wasn't the one I had just tied. Mine were glossy black, fresh cut, their tails crisp. This one had gone nicotine yellow, the plastic chalky and brittle like old bone. The tail pointed down. The cut angle matched the lazy scalene I make when my side cutters get bored. I touched it, and it flaked under my glove. There was dust inside the edge like it had been there a season. "Okay," I told myself. "Someone else did what you did. Everyone does what you do." I added my own glossy tie an inch lower. The two pointed down like a set of teeth. The reach truck beeper rattled the corner of the air again, a polite alarm from a row that dead ends at a locked cage. I almost yelled for Manny without thinking, my throat a spring-loaded thing. The PA clicked. I froze like the zip tie could hear. "Manager to receiving," the old voice said, and in the same breath my radio hissed the live voice of Alicia. "Manager to the back now." Nothing in either voice said my name. It should have been relief. I kept moving because stopping had earned me the echo. I rounded past the toy cage, the stuffed animal's eyes, all convinced at once I was something to look at. I tied another zip tie at F07, this time a little flag from a ribbon of stretch wrap, green as the plant ties in garden because I wanted a second color to insist on itself. I timed my steps with the baler's little sigh, found the door with the bar I know better than most people. I pushed. The night poured back in. The far beep of Manny's scrubber stuttering, the PA announcing a sanitized associate to sporting goods, the store air warmer on my face. I'd gone deep and come out shrinking in the right place. I wanted to be done. When I looked down at my cart, the blender from G12 sat in it. I hadn't pulled it. I hadn't climbed G12's ladder, hadn't shouldered past top stock. It was there. The zebra's last line of text read, "Pick completed. User, my badge number." At time 02:17:14. I don't keep my voice on a leash that tight, but I didn't make a sound. I watched my hands for the sign that I was sleepwalking and had done a thing I didn't keep for myself. They looked dull and honest and dry with dust. I left the cart and walked myself to the break room to make my body small in a chair because I didn't trust the shape the back room had tried to hand me. I told Manny a version he could accept. The zebra lost Wi-Fi. It got confused. It said I was everywhere. I retied some routes so I wouldn't double back. He nodded like a man who has walked into a steel row and thought it was midnight. APs back there are old, he said. Signals bounce off steel. It'll triangulate and decide you live inside the rack you're standing next to. Don't trust it for location. Trust your head. His hands smelled like simple green and bearings. As for the blender, he added, seeing it on my cart, though I hadn't meant him to. Maybe you pulled it and forgot. No accusation. A gift of an out. Alicia asked for the safety version. No wandering, she said. If you're lost, radio. I don't want to write a report with disoriented in it. She's not unkind. She uses the word report like a weather. Also, she added, that pencil blade look she gets when she's making 2 columns in her mind. Stop leaving trash on the steel. They're not trash, I said. They're markers. A child's defense. She looked past me toward the maze, then softened the hard out of her eyes. Fine, but put dates on them so I can pull old ones. We're not building a nest. So I did. I took a Sharpie and wrote 02 on a little tail of stretch wrap and looped it on an inner post. The next night I found a flag the same color, same width, crinkled with age and gray with dust, tied so close to mine they brushed in the breath nobody confessed to. No date. It felt like an older version of these. Same idea, like a sentence I'd overheard and then thought I'd invented. Ruth, when she came back to help with a push, wrinkled her nose at the back room like you do at a loved one's closet. They used to paint numbers on the floor, she said, towing an old stencil ghost that read H07 if you squinted. We tore a row out and put another in when the DSD contract changed. People keep their maps in their legs. When you move the steel, the body panics until it learns. She rubbed a thumb across the brittle yellow tie I'd found earlier and watched it snap like a cookie. Some markers are older than the people who tied them. Leave them be. I tried to rationalize the blender. I knew the exact weight of a lie, like, I forgot I pulled it, and how to carry it around so it didn't tear my pocket. I checked the zebra logs. Manny exported a pick report. User, me, bin, G12. Time, 02:17:14. Location accuracy, low. The app had stopped drawing 2 blue dots and, in the exported file, placed me neatly at G12 like a person who had no problem with the world. I compared the bevel cut on my zip ties to the yellowed one's little angle and hated that they looked like cousins. I wrote dates on new flags and found old ones with no date, and that should have been that. We are not the first. We won't be the last. The sound of the reach truck bled into my off hours. It's not a bad sound, 3 beeps and a pulsing amber, but it has a moral certainty that turns wrong when you hear it in a place that doesn't have a machine. My apartment's fridge does something like it when the compressor starts. The first time after the long night that it did, I froze with my keys still in my hand, thinking I was about to be clipped by tines I couldn't see. I laughed it off in the mirror and did not tell anyone. I stopped leaving a lot of markers because the act started to feel like asking. I left a few, the way you leave lights on for a cat you don't admit you own. I followed Manny's close. Cake-wise, and let it be a religion, I didn't have to be seen practicing. It still stretched sometimes, the back room. Turn left, find the same tote you swore you passed. Turn right, the baler hum farther than it should be. It didn't happen every night. It didn't even happen most nights. It happened enough that when the zebra pinged me with a pick to a location I hadn't seen, ASL 0, bin 0, I laughed and then wrote it down like a person learning a new language. I did not follow it. Not that night. We talk about this stuff in the back like we talk about weather. Practical, a little superstitious, always returning to the way we keep our bodies inside the rules that keep the job from eating more than it's owed. The maze makes you petty. You start hoarding certainties. The touch of a steel post, cool under your hand, real. The grit of dust on your glove, real. The fact that everything repeats until it doesn't, real. The moments that fold you back to where you started, real in the way a store is real, a place that moves while insisting it's steady. If there's an answer, it lives in the distances and the sameness, in the way steel tricks your eyes and Wi-Fi bounces off metal and the brain sprints to close gaps it should leave open. And also in the way a zip tie you tied last night can be found this morning with the tired posture of plastic that learned about time long before you got here. When it gets long back there, I put my hand on the steel, I listen for the bailer, and I go clockwise. If the PA clicks at the exact second the zebra says I was somewhere else, I try not to look up. I don't always succeed. The building teaches you its routes. Sometimes when I make it back to the swinging door and the store's warmer air hits my face, I feel like I've negotiated with something and won, even if all I've done is arrive where I meant to start. Service desk at night is a small stage with too many props. The counter curves around you so you're both on display and hidden. Behind your knees, there's always a box half full of reshop that hasn't made it back where it belongs. Above your head, a convex mirror that turns every passerby into a fish with a shopping cart. The printers hiss their warm paper breath whether you need them or not. The cash drawer smells faintly like pennies and lotion. The bill strap's rubbery. The coins clean in a way money shouldn't be. We share the space with cigarettes in a locked cabinet. Gift cards that reflect light like beetle shells. A donation box that makes people polite when they're mad. And a phone with a green button that opens your voice into the ceiling if you let it. Alicia rotates people through desk duty when she wants them to practice being calm while they're busy. Follow the flow chart, she says, handing you a laminated card like it's armor. Receipt, scan, no receipt, ID over threshold, manager, RTV, code 850. If the UPC doesn't scan, key it. If it still doesn't scan, key it as a not found and tag for claims. She has a way of making bureaucracy feel like a life raft. I held onto the flowchart the way you hold onto the edge of a pool when you haven't decided if you're ready to swim. Night desk is more phone than people. You answer calls you can't fix and page managers who may already be where they're needed. Now and then, a last-minute person brings a return in like a confession, apologizing to you for the store's rules. The bell on the counter dinged itself when someone leaned on it, a soft, guilty sound that made you want to soften your face. I liked the way the receipt paper curled out warm into my hand. The letters crisp at first and then, if you aren't careful, fading like a memory left in the sun. I'd heard the story from Dayside that sometimes items came back that we didn't carry, and I filed it next to the other workers' folklore. Returns are slippery. People bring you the wrong brand with the right box and swear the universe owes them $10. Barcodes change. Vendors swap SKUs and pretend no one will notice. I'd had enough nights in housewares to respect how quickly the present can insist it has always been this way. So when she set the frame on the counter, I didn't think, wrong. I thought, perfect timing. It was just the right size to be a problem. It wasn't fancy. Maybe that's why I remember it so clearly. 8 by 10, wood with a thin beaded edge like a neat collar, a brown that leaned toward honey. No brand badge on the back, just brown paper neat under a grid of old-style staples and a brass triangle hanger flatter than we use now. The glass had the faintest drag of micro-scratches across one corner like someone once cleaned it with the wrong cloth. When I lifted it, it felt heavier than it looked, the way old things do because wood used to be wood. She didn't smile exactly. She did the apology people do when they want you to say it isn't a big deal. Didn't look right on the wall, she said. I'm sorry to trouble you. I asked for her receipt and she gave it to me like she was handing over a blessing. Thermal paper, warm as if it had been printed recently, but the ink said otherwise. The font was the older, thinner kind. The footer was our old thank you, without the exclamation marks of the newer build. The timestamp said 2358. The date, this was the part that made the back of my neck prick, was a day that lives in my head for another reason. 3 months before our grand opening. The register field read 00,000. The tender line said debit, but the last 4 were zeros like a template. The cashier field was blank. A neat block of text where we usually print the store address held our store name without the super, like we never got the remodel. Do you have the card? I asked because the flowchart wanted a card. She blinked at me like I'd asked her to name the shades of brown. Charge slip, she said, and I heard the date in the phrase more than anywhere else. Some people still say it. It doesn't mean they're out of time. But stacked with the rest, the old font, the register 0, it made me itch under my vest. I tried to scan the UPC on the frame. The scanner beeped politely and then told me it had no idea what I was asking it to do. Not found. I keyed the digits the way you do when old labels have a trailing check digit that throws you. Not found. I tried a category lookup, a description search, frame 8x10 wood bead. The system offered me 3 items with names that felt like cousins and prices wrong by a hair. $5.88 lived there, taunting, a number I'd seen lately where it didn't belong. Alicia says, if in doubt and within policy, give the customer the easier version of the world, so I offered store credit. The woman nodded like that had been the answer before she asked the question. I'm sorry, she said again in the same rhythm. I printed the return slip. The printer warmed the paper like breath on glass. the RA code stamped neat. Above it, in smaller font, the attendant approval field populated with my badge number even though I hadn't keyed it. There's a way these systems talk to each other behind your hands. I signed the back. I tagged the frame for claims with a blue strip and wrote, "Not found RTV," in letters I hoped looked as assured as I wanted to feel. When I put the frame behind the desk in the bin with the sad hair tools and once-used candles, it slid until it sat angled. Its glass caught the vestibule doors in small, perfect reflection, the way the doors breathe at night. Open, close, a sigh of weather. And I told myself not to assign intention to where an object came to rest. I went back to T's. He phoned, to the green button, to the flowchart. The bell didn't ring for a long minute, and I felt the weight of the frame behind my knees like a polite dog. The next night, after the long part of the shift where everyone wanders a bit thin, she came back. I knew it was her before she reached the desk, not because of her face. She was the kind of person you forget describing and then see exactly again, but because the apology already sat in the air between us like a seat saved with a sweater. "I'm sorry," she said, the same cadence. "It still doesn't look right." Different jacket, navy windbreaker instead of the brown cardigan from before, and a different bag folded into her hand, but the frame was the same. I know because my blue claims tag hugged one corner, my handwriting small neat on the edge. "We processed this," I said gently, "because the flowchart doesn't have a branch for insistence that isn't combative." She looked at the blue tag as if a ribbon had been tied around a gift that wasn't hers. "I didn't mean to make work," she said. "They told me to bring it back if it didn't sit right." "Who told you?" I asked, and she blinked again and looked toward the doors. The vestibule sighed and opened and closed for nobody. "I can do store credit again," I said. I checked the claims bin. Empty. The sad hair tool and the candle remained. The frame did not. I know I'd put it there. I lifted the counter flap and checked the lower shelf where we stashed the awkward things. Lost and found keys, a small stack of printed policies, a pair of reading glasses no one admits to needing. The frame sat there instead, angled the way it had angled the night before, glass catching the sliding doors. My blue tag had been peeled neatly back and then reapplied, a wrinkle where there hadn't been one. I looked up at the convex mirror and saw the desk, small and wide and curved, and for a second, a blur crossing the vestibule from left to right so fast it was only a fact after it happened. Someone else turned their head, same as me, and saw nothing. I ran the return again because sometimes following the process is the only way to keep your hands from shaking. The receipt printed warm. The timestamp said 02/17/03. The register field read 000 Zen. The thank you was the thinner font. The attendant approval populated my badge even though Alicia had taken my radio and sent me for a break 20 minutes before. She handed it back just then as if to prove time moves despite us. "Phones?" she asked. "I'll cover," I said, and she nodded and disappeared toward TLE to deal with something noisy. I wrote RTV in blue on the tag again. I opened the small claims cage, locked, put the frame inside, and closed it. The cage is ridiculous, thin mesh like a promise more than a barrier, but it makes people feel better about loss. I spun the dial on the cheap combination lock, the way you spin a top to see if it will keep itself up, and the PA clicked right then, a dry little inhale above my head. "Associate to service desk," the old voice said, and I let the phone ring twice so I could watch the cage for one breath longer. It held. I answered. The line hissed like a seashell, and then dropped. A few minutes later, a man came to buy a pack of cigarettes and a money order, and the machine threw a tantrum about the bill acceptor. My hands did the things they know to do. The bell rang once, no one standing there. When I turned back, the frame was where I had not left it, behind the lower curve of the counter, angled toward the doors. The cage showed closed, the lock where I left it. I bent to pick the frame up, my body what it is, thin with night and too many small awakenings, and the glass offered me the vestibule again, the ceiling grid, the fisheye convex mirror, and my face too close to all of it. A woman moved through the reflection at the edge of the glass, cardigan now, brown, the same as the first night. When I lifted my head, the doors shrugged open and shut for air. No one. Ruth wandered by, blessed timing, with a box of go-backs and that look on her face that says she's going to say something practical or interesting. "Did she leave already?" she asked, nodding at the house doors as if a person had just gone. "Who?" I asked instead of answering. She took in the frame, my tag, the way my hands tried to set the glass down gently enough to pretend this wasn't a thing. "We used to carry those," she said, without looking at me, "before the reset. Then the vendor changed the line to MDF and they never sat flat again." She reached and straightened the tag so the edges met. "You should RTV it if the system lets you. Don't let it float." I put the frame in a tote with a lid, the poly wobbly, a little crack at the corner that makes the world inside feel separate. I wrote claims, do not return to sales on a strip of duct tape with a Sharpie that smelled like kindergarten. I stashed the tote under the lowest shelf of the desk where only someone crawling would see it. The tote had a scuff you only notice when you push it in, the shape of a shoe maybe, from a day I wasn't there. I finished my shift with a stiffness I reserve for times when my body wants to move quickly, and there is nowhere to go. At 4:10, Manny waved me into the AP office. The camera over service desk had hiccuped at 02:17:14, a smear and a skip. On either side of the skip, you could see the desk, the cage, me. Between frames, something darker crossed the vestibule like a person who forgot they had to be in the video to count. The microphone picked up the PA click, and then the old voice asking for me in the tone of the ceiling. Manny didn't say, "It's nothing." He also didn't say, "It's something." He rewound and replayed and shook his head like a man trying to find a rattle he can fix. "Let me move the camera angle tomorrow," he said. "See if we can catch the cage too." We tried to do the responsible thing. Alicia wrote a claims ticket the long way, with notes and a picture. She signed it. I signed it. We tagged the frame twice, blue and red, redundancy is religion, and logged it into the little spreadsheet nobody admits to keeping. "Vendor return," she said, and we walked it together to the RTV cage in receiving, the one with the serious lock and the parts of the building I trust more than the small ones. We put it on a shelf with a family of dented air fryers and a box of toothbrushes no one had asked for. It sat ordinary among the ordinary. The lock clicked with a satisfaction that made my shoulders drop for the first time in an hour. It was at service desk the next night, angled toward the doors, tags right where we'd put them, duct tape label perfectly legible. The RTV cage had a lock, and the lock showed closed, and Manny hustled down there without being asked and confirmed with his own eyes that the shelf held a gap where he had expected a thing. "Did you pull it?" he asked, as if maybe I had been efficient in a way I am not. "No," I said. He scruffed his hair and said something soft to the steel like the store had embarrassed him in front of a friend. We joked about the baler. Someone always jokes about the baler. "Feed it the problem," Manny said, not serious, because glass and metal brackets are a rule-breaking kind of mess, and he is the kind of man who hates paperwork more than he fears anything you can't wrench. "It'll come back in a different shape," Ruth muttered, no smile, then cut a return label into smaller and smaller pieces like she was worried about the size of the words. Alicia, who doesn't indulge jokes when she's rounding errors, said, "Destroy tag, take pictures. If anyone asks, you followed procedure." We printed a destroy label and slapped it on the back paper with too much force. I took a photo with the Zeb. Bra that uploaded sideways. The app assigned it a number. The number looked like a place I hadn't seen yet. Aisle 0, bin 0. I refused to think about it. We didn't put it in the baler. We're not savages. We put it in TLE's locked cabinet for 3 hours and came back to find a clean rectangle in the dust where it had been, which was almost worse than if the dust had kept its shape. We slid it behind the cigarette cabinet, foolish because cameras don't see there and it's almost a dare, and I told myself I was testing people, not the building. It sat at the desk anyway by the time the bell rang, angled just so, glass caught to the doors. I wrote an X in grease pencil on the lower right corner of the glass and immediately felt childish. In the morning, the X was a pale smear across the lower left, like it had been wiped and then tried again by a left-handed version of me. Grease pencils move, hands move. I am not a scientist here. I am a person who started saying sorry to a piece of wood. I tried ritual. At close, I said, "Good night," to the desk, and to the little bin where the frame belonged for the night. I turned it face down. It still sat angled the next shift, face up, glass clean. The back paper showed a slight peel near one staple, as if someone had checked to see if a certificate or a picture hid underneath. We even put a handwritten note on it one night. Ruth's idea, her clear schoolteacher script, hold for vendor, do not process. Because sometimes saying a thing out loud calms the part of the world that waits for instruction. The note traveled with the frame instead of stopping anything. It looked like a bedsheet pinned to a clothesline. The woman came back a third time. Green jacket, same apology. She put 2 fingers on the frame like it would take away the words if she held them down. "I'm sorry," she said. "You told me to bring it back." "Who told you?" I asked. She tilted her head, the small, puzzled kindness of someone who can't make you understand something she doesn't see as complicated. "You did," she said. I checked the system. No transaction under her ID, no camera showing her face clearly. The receipt she offered had a timestamp at 23:58 and a register 0 and no store address. The paper was warm. I tried to find her in the vestibule reflection to decide if she had edges as sharp as the doors. The amber light on the floor scrubber wheeled by in the distance like a patient heart and made the glass catch its pulse. The PA breathed once, clicked, held. "Associate to service desk," the old voice said. Manny leaned against the cigarette cabinet like a man who wanted to pick a fight with a wire and wasn't allowed. Sometimes you tag a thing and it never moves because the system keeps its weight, he offered, his best machine exorcism. We can write it down until it balances. So I wrote it down. Dates, times, where I put it, and where it wasn't. The letters smeared when I checked them later, like I'd written them before the paper had decided to be dry. I moved with a kind of careful that felt like superstition with a time card. On nights when I tried to be funny, I told the frame if it had to sit there, it could at least face me, and then I turned it so the glass watched service desk instead of the doors. I'd come back from a cigarette break, I don't smoke, and it had turned back on its little resting place to look at the sliding, breathing front like it couldn't help itself. On the report, Alicia ran at the end of